But the most annoying thing about them is probably having to take the laptop out of your backpack and put it in a separate bin while going through the security check. But, of course, they wouldn't make us do those extra moves if there wasn't a good reason for it. Laptops are dense, and X-rays can't penetrate them, so it's easy to hide something dangerous there. If the device is out and on its own in a separate bin, it's easier for the scanners to capture something dangerous. Most airplanes are white. Is there a benefit to choosing this exact color? No, white paint doesn't make a place feel lighter. Neither does it save money on painting. Here are the actual reasons for the choice: safety, efficiency, and comfort. The first airplanes had a metallic color, but the problem with metal is that it's prone to corrosion, so painting it is a great way to protect an airplane from corrosion. White is favored for several reasons. First, planes fly high above the clouds and are exposed to sunlight a lot. White is the color that absorbs the least heat, and white planes get heated less. Also, sunlight makes the paint fade away. A colorful airplane will have its paint fade very fast and will require repainting. And repainting is costly, so painting aircraft white is a more lasting choice. Also, any damage is more easily noticed on a white surface. So that's one more point for the white color. We always board from the left side of the plane, every single time, no exceptions. For some reason, the right side just doesn't seem to be an option. Yes, that's done on purpose. First, the captain usually sits on the left. This way, it's easier for the pilot to align the plane with the terminal jet bridge. Also, aircraft are fueled and loaded with baggage on the right side. Since people board the plane from the left, the crew can do their job undisturbed, and there's no danger to passengers. Consistency with the choice of a side helps to make everything work more effectively. Since everyone always enters from the left, all jet bridges are designed to get attached to the left side of the airplane. If every airplane had the freedom to choose the side, it would create an additional mess for the logistics behind the process. There are more questions popping up, like what does this black triangle drawn above one of the windows mean? Apparently, it marks the seat from which the view of the airplane's wing is the best. It's needed for the crew to find the spot as fast as possible if, in case of an emergency, they need to inspect the engines, slats, or flaps. This mark saves a lot of time. Next, the rows aren't well aligned with the windows. This is business. Originally, all planes are designed with rows and windows lining up perfectly. But when an airline buys a jet, they add some additional seats, squeezing them closer together. This way, they have more seats, which means more passengers, so they can sell more tickets. But you get less space for your legs and might miss out on a window. Also, all windows have rounded corners, and this is done for safety reasons. There used to be planes with squared windows, but those caused crashes because such windows couldn't withstand high-altitude pressures. At high altitudes, external atmospheric pressure is lower than the pressure inside the cabin. So, there's a big difference in pressure inside and outside the airplane, and this creates stress. Without windows, this stress flows smoothly through the material. A squared window becomes an obstacle, and the flow of stress needs to change direction. The pressure builds up in the corners, leading to cracks. As a result, such windows break. Oval windows allow the stress to flow more smoothly without disrupting them too much and preventing stress concentration. So, oval windows are safer. The glass used in production is stretched acrylic glass, and there are 3 separate panes of it. This is done as a security measure in case there is a breach. This way, at least one pane will remain intact at all times. Have you ever noticed those small holes in the windows? The tiny hole is actually only in the pane that's in the middle. Its task is to regulate the huge pressure difference inside and outside the cabin. This way, the outer pane can handle the load. If the outer pane breaks, the middle one, even though there's a hole in it, will be able to keep the window intact. Also, that hole prevents the windows from fogging up. Now, let's say you want to relax and watch a movie. Luckily, there's a pair of headphones. But they're weird. They have a 2-pronged plug. No, this is not some kind of advanced technology. This is a witty move to prevent theft. If you can't use them anywhere else but on the airplane, no one will have the urge to snatch them away. Outside the airplane, they're basically useless. And then they bring food. There are people who love airplane food and people who aren't very fond of it. But most will agree that food does taste different in the air. Turns out, it's actually a thing. Low air pressure, lack of humidity, and background noise that we have at high altitudes change the functioning of our taste buds. They become less sensitive to sweet and salty foods, so airlines have to use more seasoning. Have you ever wondered what would happen if someone opened an airplane door accidentally? This wouldn't end well. It would be very dangerous to say the least. More specifically, soon there would be a lack of oxygen in the cabin. But gladly, no one can open that door accidentally. The pressure difference between inside and outside makes it almost impossible. It would take some immense strength to open it. The doors are designed to open on their own in case of an emergency. Speaking of safety, during takeoff and landing, the crew dims the light in the cabin. This is done for a good reason. This way, in case of emergency, you will see everything more clearly. Your eyes will get used to the darkness, and you'll have an easier time evacuating. Now, about pilots. They always wear those cool sunglasses, but the purpose is not to look cooler. They're used to protect the eyes. Throughout their career, pilots have to take care of their vision, but the problem is that it's not an easy task when you're a pilot. The damaging solar radiation that our sun emits is filtered out by the Earth's atmosphere, so the sunlight isn't very damaging to you if you spend most of your time on the ground. But it's different up in the sky. There's less air there, and the brightness is way higher. And with every 1,000 feet of elevation, the solar radiation is around 5% stronger. On average, aircraft fly at an altitude of 35,000 feet. This means that the amount of UV radiation is 175% greater than on the ground. This is very damaging to any person's vision. The large amount of time pilots spend in the air makes them vulnerable to different eye problems. And having eye problems can cost a pilot their career. So, wearing sunglasses is a crucial thing for them, and these sunglasses must be of the best quality. They should minimize the impact of sunlight and withstand UV rays, providing 100% protection for the eyes. Also, they can't be polarized, since polarization can mess with the perception of the cockpit displays. They should provide the best clarity, decrease eye fatigue, and minimize color deformation, so that pilots can see just like they would without their sunglasses on. Most airports are equipped with giant kitchens where the food for passengers is prepared for different airlines at once. Since those oh-so-delightful airplane meals must be cooked about 6 to 10 hours prior to the flight, the kitchens have to work 24/7. Besides, the menu for your flight is developed up to a year in advance. This is a common practice for most airlines, because every single ingredient matters and adds to expenses. In fact, American Airlines managed to save $40,000 per year in 1987 after they removed just one olive from every salad they served on their flights. If you have a long layover between flights, going to the nearest hotel to rest might not be the cheapest option. There's a much better trick. Check if the airport or airline sells 24-hour access to the VIP lounge zone. In most cases, you can have free snacks and drinks there, and use free shower cabins and rooms for rest at a very affordable price. There's an actual term for the first 60 minutes after you check in, the golden hour. It's the time that passengers statistically spend more money in retail and duty-free areas of the airport. And having the most comfortable seats in those areas right in front of the shops is a clever trick to lure you in for shopping. Sitting in a comfy chair while looking at a flashy sign or shopping window can be tempting. If you ever wanted to know what happens to your baggage while you're on board a plane, the short answer is that airport staff don't know once it leaves their territory. And they probably don't really care. Sorry. Baggage is sorted automatically. Scanners scan the barcode and sort the baggage according to its destination. The three main tasks of airport baggage handlers are to move your bags from the check-in area to the gate, to move them from one gate to another when you have a connection, and to move your bags from the plane to the baggage claim area. And that's it. So, if your baggage doesn't move fast enough, it can be late for your connecting flight, or the exact opposite. Your bag gets to your destination before you do because you're stuck at passport control. Another problem can arise if you forget to tear off any old stickers showing a different destination. In this case, the scanner might send your baggage to the wrong country. You arrive at the airport, already anticipating a couple weeks away from work and all your daily troubles. Park your car in the lot and then find out that it's going to cost you a small fortune to leave your car there. Why so much? In fact, airport parking lots are a business just like any other. The land on which they're built, the construction of the lot itself, the maintenance of the whole thing once it's already in operation, all that costs a handsome amount of money. And somebody's got to pay for it, of course. In addition, parking right next to an airport is simply convenient, which adds to the final cost. If you're not ready to dip into your pocket for a piece of extra comfort, better take a cab. Contrails, those white trails airplanes often leave behind them at high altitudes, are easily mistaken for engine exhaust. But most are nothing more than water vapor. During a flight, moisture in the air collects in the engines before being vented with the exhaust. The hot, wet air leaving the engines mixes with the cool, dry air found at high altitudes, resulting in long, thin lines of vapor. Humidity determines when contrails form and how long they remain visible. If it's already humid up there, then there's more water and the contrail is more prominent. And if it's cold, the droplets might turn into ice, staying behind for a much longer time. If someone were able to open the door mid-flight, they would be immediately pulled out of the plane by a sudden change in air pressure. It could also do serious harm to the aircraft. Fortunately, that's almost impossible. The doors on an airliner open inward while the cabin pressure pushes them out from the inside. The difference between internal and external pressure makes it impossible for the door to open. It might seem odd that the flight crew cares whether your window shades are up or down. The main reason is so that the passenger's eyes can adjust to the outside light. Mostly, it's just a matter of getting people on and off quickly. But in an emergency, the last thing they want is people stopping to blink before they evacuate the plane. Another reason for all the shades to stay up when the airplane is about to take off or land is for the ground crew to see if there's any trouble on board. For example, if there's a fire in the cabin, the ground crew will immediately notice it and act accordingly. If the shades are down, they might lose precious time they would need to rescue the passengers and the airplane crew. Ever notice the numbers on the end of the runway? They're actually used to show the pilot which direction the plane is facing. For example, the number 36 is short for a heading of 360 degrees, or due north. Along with numbers, the letters R and L indicate if the nearest runway is to the right or left. Every commercial airplane you've been on has only one wing. That's right, the left and right wings are actually two parts of a single wing. The first airplanes were called biplanes because they had two wings, one on the top and the other going through the bottom of the fuselage. They were connected with struts and wires, which made a kind of box that basically allowed the aircraft not to fall apart in the air. It was necessary at lower speeds that early planes could only muster. But as the engines increased in power, the second wing became redundant. The single wing still serves as a support for the whole structure though. Looking out the window on the plane's wing, you can see a small yellow double hook on it. It seems strange since it might mess with aerodynamics, but it's there for your safety. In case of an emergency landing, these hooks are used to secure ropes that help passengers exit the plane via the wings. If they're slippery, the rope will help you keep your footing and not fall over while going down. There are several extremely fast streams of air high up in the atmosphere of our planet. Their paths are meandering, but they have a more or less constant flow, allowing passenger aircraft to use them. When an airplane comes close to a jet stream, it may adjust to the direction of its current and fly a lot faster, propelled by the flow. Many airlines use this to their advantage to cut the fuel costs and make air traveling even faster. Clouds, especially thunderheads, can indicate that an area of turbulence is ahead. But sometimes, clear air turbulence occurs when a plane can drop a few feet and start shaking without any warning. It happens when two bodies of air clash at very high speeds. And it's absolutely invisible, so the pilots can't tell when it would happen. The chances of getting into an area of clear air turbulence are higher at low altitudes, over mountain ranges, and near the jet streams. Normally, after it's hit by lightning, an airplane is sent for inspection right after landing, but it can still safely complete its current flight. The fuselage conducts electricity well enough, and like with a lightning rod, the zap will most probably strike one of the tips of the airplane, either one of the wings or the nose. Then it seeks the ground, but doesn't find it, exiting from the tail in the end. It's easier for electricity to roll through the surface of the plane than go inside, so people on board are safe from its effects. Still, lightning is powerful, and there can be some damage done to the airplane on the outside.
Hello, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard today's flight from San Francisco to New York. Fasten your seatbelts, and I'll tell you what's going on inside the plane at different stages of the flight.
Passengers always board from the left side. That's because the captain sits on the left side of the airplane cabin, so it's easier for him to align the plane with the terminal jet bridge from that side. Also, the aircraft is fueled and loaded with baggage on the right side. With passengers boarding from the left side, the crew can do their job undisturbed. If your priority is to get out of the plane as fast as possible once you arrive, pick an aisle seat near the front of the plane. If you want to have the most comfortable flight, pick a seat in the middle of the plane because the turbulence is less noticeable there. An even better option in terms of comfort would be those seats by the emergency exit. They have more legroom and you can stretch. If you want the safest seats on the plane, your best option is the back of it. Once you're seated, take your time to spot the nearest emergency exits. Count the number of rows between your seat and an emergency exit. It can save your life in case you have to leave the plane quickly. You'll manage to find the exit easily, even if everything around is dark or if you're blinded. You'll find it just by touching the seats and passing the number of rows you counted in advance. Boarding completed. Time to get ready for takeoff. Cabin crew are walking down the aisles to make sure all passengers are following their instructions. Okay, everyone has their seatbelts fastened and window blinds open. There's no one in the bathroom and the runway is all clear. Why aren't we still moving? We can go! Turns out, the aircraft must wait for a while. It's all about safety. When a plane takes off, it activates two powerful forces. One is jet wash, a fast-moving gas so strong it can easily flip a car, so no one can be near the plane. Another force is wingtip vortices that are the result of the wind generating the plane lift. These powerful rotating forces go from both wings and stay in the air for about 3 minutes after an aircraft takes off. If another plane flies into the air while the wingtip vortices are still there, the pilot will lose the roll control over the aircraft. The plane will flip over and crash. So, no plane is allowed to take off without waiting for at least 3 minutes after the previous one leaves. Back to the pilot's cabin. There are two people there, the pilot and the co-pilot. In case something happens to the first pilot, the co-pilot can take over. Both pilots eat different food to reduce the risk of them both feeling unwell. While the first pilot controls and adjusts the autopilot, the second one monitors the controls or communicates with the control tower. Also, there are checklists for safety standards to be satisfied at different stages of the route. So, while the captain is focused on the route, the co-pilot can complete the checklist and make sure that everything's going according to the plan. Flying is costly, so not only the passengers, but the airline as well want to make the flight as fast and short as possible. The shortest way is always a straight line. Still, aircraft routes look like an arc. It's because the Earth isn't flat like we see it on a map. it's a sphere. So, these lines only appear like arcs when we project them on a map. In reality, they're pretty much straight. Every airline and every plane wants to fly this most efficient way, but there are hundreds of planes flying every day, often in the same direction, so the air highway is pretty busy. The route data of every plane is pre-planned and is uploaded to the system. There are several of those so that the pilot has options if something goes wrong or if weather conditions change. The pilot can set up the right mode, and autopilot can control the airplane within its uploaded route. Keep up the altitude, speed, and direction. The pilots, meanwhile, keep an eye on the autopilot and focus on other tasks like navigating, planning, and communicating with air traffic control. On the ground, air traffic is managed by dispatchers, who watch over planes and make sure they don't get too close to each other. The air traffic is especially heavy in some places, so when an aircraft enters a busy zone, it has to follow a very specific route. There are also specified points called Fixed Navigational Aids, or, shortly, nav aids. Those are devices on the ground that send radio signals in the sky that an aircraft can pick up on. There are also waypoints, which are geographical points on Earth. They're loaded into the GPS system, and an aircraft has to follow them. So basically, the whole route is flying from one waypoint to another all the way to the destination place. Time to start the descent. You can see the plane's altitude on the control panel. The pilots know the plane's speed, so they can calculate at what distance to destination to start their descent. If the altitude is 27,000 feet and the speed is 300 nautical miles per hour, the first number divided by the second gives us 90 nautical miles. This is the point they have to start the descent to maintain the descent path. There are also a couple of other things to consider, such as the wind speed and direction, or uneven speed drop. To descend, pilots have to get approval from the controller. Sometimes, due to traffic, they don't get it right away. So, they just keep moving forward without descending, therefore shifting away from the descending profile and land when the approval is given. Takeoff and landing are the most crucial and dangerous phases of any flight. That's because the pilot has less time and space to react to any occurring problems. In the air, even if both engines stop working, a plane won't just start falling. Instead, it'll begin to glide through the sky, losing about 1 mile of altitude every 10 of them going forward. So, the pilot will have about 8 minutes to react and find a safe place to land. If an engine fails during takeoff or landing, the pilots will only have seconds to decide if they should still take off and deal with the problem in the air or cancel the flight. Even if something happens, canceling the flight isn't always an option. When the plane reaches the speed of 100 miles per hour, you can't possibly stop it before the runway ends. And getting off the runway isn't good, to say the least. To ensure everyone's safety, the rules at these stages of the flight are especially strict. You should turn on the airplane mode on your devices to make sure that the signals that devices transmit don't interfere with the plane's electronic systems and don't block the radio's frequency. You've probably heard that clicking sound a speaker makes right before your cell phone gets a call, if it's right next to the speaker. These sounds are what the pilot might hear instead of the instructions while communicating with air traffic control. Even a 1-second interference can cause a lot of confusion. Just some certain types of cell phones can cause this problem, and if it's a combination of factors, the cell phone type, how far away it is from the cabin, and how many cell phones aren't in airplane mode. The cabin crew can't find out which of the passengers didn't put their phone into airplane mode, but the pilots will always know when many people didn't do it. You should keep your window blind open during takeoff and landing for safety reasons as well. This way, your eyes get used to the light or the darkness outside. In case of an emergency, during these risky stages of the flight, people who are comfortable with the natural light will react and evacuate faster, which is crucially important when every second matters. For the very same reason, the lights are dimmed in the airplane. This way, the light will be closest to the light outside the aircraft. Another reason is that if the window blinds are open, people from the outside can see what's going on in the plane. For example, they can see if there's a fire inside and where exactly it is. This way, they can plan the evacuation better. They ask you to fold up your table and put up your seat in the upright position to ensure that in case of an emergency, there will be no obstacles in the way. Everyone should be able to leave the plane as fast as possible. The passengers aren't allowed to use the bathroom during takeoff and landing because there's no seatbelt, no safe escape route with no obstacles, and it's not safe overall. A person can get trapped there during evacuation. The pilot isn't even allowed to take off or land while someone is in the bathroom. And looks like we're ready for landing.
Welcome to New York.
The Himalayas have some of the highest peaks in the world, including Mount Everest. But it's no surprise airplanes find it difficult to navigate the area. But why are commercial airplanes actually banned from flying there? For starters, these mountains have an average height of more than 20,000 feet. Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the entire world, stands at 29,037 feet high above sea level. The area is rough, filled with snow, and has almost no flat surfaces. In case of sudden cabin depressurization, it would be really difficult to perform an emergency landing, since there's literally no flat area there. More so, the low oxygen environment at such an altitude means there's likely to be a lot of turbulence. Not only is it really unpleasant for passengers, but random air movements and high wind velocity means that it's really difficult to maneuver the airplane. This area is also quite low populated, so there's not much there in terms of radar systems. And radar is crucial for aviation safety. Without radars, pilots would be unable to communicate with the ground to figure out flight conditions. It can also get so cold up there that jet fuel might completely freeze. Sure, the fuels used in airplanes usually freeze at around -50 degrees Fahrenheit, but it may be possible above Everest. The lowest temperature was recorded there back in December 2004, when thermometers showed a staggering -44 degrees Fahrenheit. So, no wonder pilots don't want to ever take that risk, especially on a commercial flight. Among the few airports located in the Himalayas, there's one considered to be the most challenging to land in the world. Only 8 pilots on the planet are certified to do it. It's called Paro International Airport, and it's located in Bhutan, a landlocked country in the eastern Himalayas. First, landing there is so dangerous because you're literally flying through some of the world's tallest mountain peaks. Not to mention that those 8 pilots also have to consider strong winds. Despite the challenges, they do manage to safely land over 30,000 people each year. Moving further, there's no radar there to guide the pilots, so they need to maneuver the aircraft entirely in manual mode. The pilots need to track their movements based on specific visual landmark checkpoints as they approach the runway. Moreover, flights are only allowed there during daylight hours and under good visibility. These pilots also need to watch out for utility poles and roofs on the hillsides too. It means they often squeeze their planes between mountain peaks at 45-degree angles before dropping quickly onto the runway. No wonder only 2 airlines fly to Paro International Airport. Apart from these commercial pilots, there are specially trained helicopter rescue pilots who spend most of their career at 20,000 feet in the sky. Most of the time, they partner with equally experienced climbers who train by crossing the Khumbu Icefall. It's dubbed the most dangerous square mile on the planet. Made up of ice pillars as tall as a 6-story building, this huge stretch of the glacier on Everest's western side is filled with bottomless ice holes. It takes between 4 to 12 hours to get from one edge of the icefall to the other, depending on the experience of the climber. You may think it's a pretty serene location since you're literally only surrounded by ice and snow, but these local professionals claim otherwise. One Everest veteran said that the noise was actually the worst part of the job. The mountain produces awful squeaking sounds and sometimes even sighs. It often makes people feel like it's talking to them, warning them about the treacherous environment. Mount Everest isn't the only no-fly zone in the world. Surprisingly, Disney parks are also part of this exclusive club. So you won't ever be able to look out of your plane window and see the beauty of fairy tale castles from up above. In recent years, a lot of crowded tourist attractions, including Disney parks, have increased their security measures to make sure their visitors are as safe as possible. As such, no aircraft is allowed to fly within 3,000 feet of Disneyland in California or Walt Disney World in Florida. It was initially a temporary ban,
but this rule became permanent back in 2003. Some other places don't have planes flying over them because of their historical importance, like Machu Picchu, located in the Peruvian Andes Mountains. There's also a large number of rare wildlife species and plants that grow exclusively in this area. It's crucial that they're protected as well as possible. What does it have to do with planes not flying over that area? Firstly, it reduces the volume of harmful chemicals in the area. Secondly, if a plane ever needed to perform an emergency landing in this location, it'd cause irreversible damage to buildings and wildlife. Surprisingly, planes can fly over the Greek Parthenon in Athens, but with one condition: not to get closer than 5,000 feet above it. This way, the historical building is kept a bit more protected from any emergency landings, since there are specially designated areas around it. You won't be able to see the Taj Mahal from above either, since it's one of the most important, oldest, and most beautiful pieces of architecture in the world. It also needs added security features. This building dates back to the 1600s. UNESCO announced it a World Heritage Site in 1983. The Indian authorities set up a no-fly zone above it in 2006. They did it to safeguard not only the building itself, but also the crowds of tourists that come there each year, 7 to 8 million people. Buckingham Palace is well known for being the residence of British monarchs. So, for the Queen's security, a no-fly zone was set up here too. Planes aren't allowed to fly over Windsor Castle either, to make sure the royal family is equally protected. Other important British buildings with no-fly zones include Number 10 Downing Street, the British Prime Minister's official residence and office, and the Houses of Parliament. George Washington's home in Mount Vernon, Virginia, can only have planes flying above it at more than 1,500 feet. The historical wooden mansion was built for President George Washington between 1758 and 1778. Unfortunately, the building has seen a lot of damage over the years, so in an effort to preserve it better, authorities decided to prohibit vibrations produced by flying aircraft. That's why another no-fly zone was established there. It covers the airspace above this National Historic Landmark. That's probably the reason why you'll rarely see pictures of this house from above. Since it's the residence of the US President, it's not allowed to fly over Washington, D.C. It's also the home of Congress and other establishments. So, the authorities set a special flight rules area, stretching for 30 miles around Ronald Reagan International Airport. This means that it's one of the airports with the most precise takeoffs and landings. Pilots have to carefully tackle no-fly zones, which sometimes results in uncomfortable takeoffs for passengers. Whenever a pilot breaks a no-fly zone, it's a big problem, like the one that happened back in 2005, when a pilot accidentally steered the plane into a prohibited zone. The capital had to be evacuated immediately, and their regular activities were interrupted. Other capitals of the world have similar requirements, like Budapest, for example. In the capital city of Hungary, planes aren't allowed to fly over the ancient inner city of Pest and the Buda Hills. Almost all air traffic is generally prohibited above Paris too, with some exceptions. Aircrafts flying no lower than 6,500 feet. Flying helicopters are also a big no-no within the city limits. Only certain choppers undertaking precise missions can get special authorization. Generally, passenger planes aren't allowed near the island of Manhattan either, partly because of the really tall buildings there and the added risk of collision, but mostly because all three major New York airports, John F. Kennedy International Airport, Newark Liberty International Airport, and LaGuardia Airport are very close to each other, so the air traffic in the area has to be really well thought out to make sure the planes don't cross paths.
February 2nd, 1970. We're at an Air Force base in Montana. Today, the 71st Fighter Interceptor Squadron plans to hold a training sortie. 4 pilots get into jet planes and take off. Shortly, one of the pilots accidentally activates the braking parachute. A fabric dome shoots out of the plane. It's filled with air and interrupts the flight of the aircraft. The pilot has to land. The other 3 pilots continue the training. They arrive at the designated place and begin to simulate an air fight. Every pilot is a professional in his field. They have undergone similar training many times. But something amazing is going to happen today. The pilot of one plane, Major Curtis, must fight with two other planes. One of the Major's opponents is Captain Faust. Two planes are chasing the target. Major Curtis turns his jet and directs it straight upwards. The other two planes follow suit. The Major performs a maneuver, vertical rolling scissors. He flies up in a spiral while simultaneously making a barrel roll. Then he turns around and flies down, performing a dive. The pursuers are not far behind. Major Curtis makes another aerial maneuver. He goes to the side and flies past Captain Faust. At this moment, the captain's plane begins to shake. Its front part lowers, and the jet hurtles to the ground at great speed. Captain Faust can't do anything. The plane doesn't listen to him. The control stick doesn't work. The engine's breaking down. The captain activates the braking parachute, but that doesn't work either. The plane is getting closer and closer to the ground. It can no longer be saved. Now it's important to save at least Captain Faust's life. He ejects and opens the parachute. Suddenly, the abandoned plane starts to fly straight. The flaps on the wings are activated, and it stops falling down. The plane without a pilot flies and slowly descends. It goes at a speed of 200 miles per hour and disappears from sight behind the cliffs. Captain Faust lands safely on a snow-covered field. The other pilots see this and are afraid the plane will fall in a nearby town. They immediately head in that direction. At the time, the unguided aircraft descends, touches the ground, and slides along the field. Next, it makes a 20-degree turn and breaks through a small fence. The plane stops at a farmer's field. The owner of the farm calls the local sheriff. The sheriff arrives and calls the nearest military base to report what happened. He approaches the fallen plane to assess the damage and turn off the humming engine. But as soon as he gets closer, the plane begins to hum and shake as if it wants to escape from there. The plane owners arrive. They are surprised because the plane is in almost perfect condition. They deliver it back to the base, repair it, and return it to service. In 2016 in Belgium, a train was traveling without a driver. That day, people at two railway stations saw a train slowly moving between them. It didn't make any stops, brake, or accelerate. It was just slowly riding onwards. Passengers couldn't contact the driver and get out of the vehicle because no one was controlling the train at the time. Panic was rising. People began to say that a ghost train without a driver appeared. But the truth turned out to be not so mysterious. The empty passenger train had been leaving the station according to the schedule when the driver noticed some kind of malfunction. He stopped the train and got out of the cabin to see what happened. But for some reason, the train started again by itself, and the driver didn't have time to jump on it. Fortunately, everything ended well. The driver warned all his colleagues about the runaway train. Everyone was evacuated from the train stations. Then, at some station, one brave driver jumped into the cabin right on the move and stopped the stray train. Speaking of ghost trains, you can see such things in the UK. They pass through railway stations that have long been abandoned. If you get on such a train, you'll probably be the only passenger. Authorities let these trains drive because it's economically profitable for the country. To cancel the route of a ghost train, you need to go through a lot of bureaucratic procedures and spend tons of extra money. So, they travel all over the country and don't bother anyone. Now we go to the ocean to learn about the ship that was drifting for several months without its captain. The ship's called Alta. It was bought by a new owner in 2017 and marked with the flag of Tanzania. Almost all cargo ships are equipped with AIS, Automatic Identification System. That's a navigation system that works on the principle of GPS. All vessels are equipped with AIS, so their movement in the ocean can be tracked. This feature was disabled for the Alta. The ship disappeared from the satellite's eyes and reappeared several times. In 2017, it sailed by Greek port cities. The Alta made 12 stops in 3 such towns in different parts of Greece. Then the AIS signal disappeared. 10 months later, the Alta appeared again on the northern coast of Africa. In September 2018, it was headed to Haiti. During this trip, the ship's engine failed. The nearest shore was far away. The ship began to drift. A few days passed. The crew couldn't repair the vessel. The food supply was almost out. The situation was getting worse as a strong hurricane was approaching the place where the ship broke down. Fortunately, a rescue boat came to the sailors. They were all evacuated shortly before the hurricane hit. The Alta stayed drifting in the ocean. After a while, another ship came to tow it to the coast of Guyana. But something went wrong. Somebody stole the Alta. It's unknown who did it and why. Then, almost 1 year passed. In the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, a British Navy ship notices the drifting Alta. There's no one on board. No one controls it. Then, almost 6 months later, a resident of a small town in Ireland sees the abandoned ship off the coast. Somehow, the Alta was able to cover the distance across the Atlantic and wash up on the coast of Ireland. The Irish authorities said it had been a miracle that no one else saw the ship. It sailed calmly for such a long distance, surviving storms. They started an investigation to establish the owner of the vessel. It's important to find a responsible person who will tow off the Alta. It's extremely difficult to do so, though. They didn't find the owner. One day, an unknown person called the Irish authorities and introduced themselves as the proprietor of the Alta, but didn't provide any evidence. But the record for the longest drifting vessel along the ocean belongs to the SS Bechimo. People were seeing this ghost ship at different times for 38 years. It was a merchant ship owned by a Canadian trading company. In 1931, the ship got blocked by ice off the coast of Alaska. A strong snowstorm began. The crew waited a week for the bad weather to end, but the storm only intensified. One day, when the storm subsided a bit, part of the crew went to the nearest town. The rest of the crew members and the captain set up camp near the vessel. The storm didn't stop for a long time. The blizzard was so strong that people couldn't see beyond their stretched hands. Finally, when the storm was over, the captain went to find the ship. And couldn't. He decided it sank during the snowfall. A week later, the ship was found, drifting near the place where it was lost. Its hull was damaged so badly that it was unsafe to sail on it. The captain decided to abandon the vessel. However, it didn't sink. For the next 38 years, it was seen drifting at various points along the coast of Alaska. The last time people saw the frozen ship stuck in the ice was in 1969. In 2006, a special project was created to find SS Bechimo. However, in all these years, they've found nothing. Its fate is still unknown. It's likely the ship found peace on the seabed of the Chukchi Sea.
It seems strange that a commercial jet doesn't have keys to turn it on, but it's a bit more complicated than just turning a key. Instead, there's a series of buttons and dials on the control board that starts the complicated process. A battery provides the power to the aircraft that is charged through a small electric generator within the jet's tail. Airflow gets in and moves into the jet's engines to keep them cool. A reserve power then warms the turbines by turning them slowly until they start spinning at the right rate. Then, the engines can be turned on, one at a time. With up to 4 engines on a commercial jet, this entire process can take up to 90 minutes. Planes don't have keys to lock the doors either, but when they sit idle, jets have security guards constantly monitoring them. But even if someone happened to get past them, it wouldn't be a quick getaway. When you enter the plane, the captain keeps a close eye on the boarding process. They are not only in command of the flight deck, but also of the passenger's cabin. To become a commercial pilot, you gotta have a distance vision of at least 20/20. But depending on the airline, it's sometimes okay if your perfect vision is assisted with glasses. It's time to find a seat on the plane. You checked in late, and you've already had an unpleasant experience of not getting on your flight like that in the past. This is because airlines purposely overbook their flights, just in case there are no-shows or cancellations. So, you didn't get to choose your seat this time. You walk past the front seats in jealousy. There are seats that are always taken much faster because everyone wants to leave the plane as soon as possible after it lands. But if you're choosing safety over early departure, the back is the place to be. It's estimated to be 40% safer in the rear end of the plane. Maybe you prefer to drive instead of flying? the chances of something dangerous happening to a plane during a flight are 1 in 11 million. Compare it to the likelihood of a car accident, which is 1 in 5,000. You've been placed at the emergency exit. Excellent, more legroom. Over the past 30 years, legroom has been decreasing more with every year. Up to 5 inches on some airlines. No, you haven't been getting taller. The reason behind this is the more people they're able to fit in, the more money the airline makes. Airlines don't build their own aircraft and use factory-made planes. From there, each airline will determine its own seating structure. This is also why the seats don't line up with the windows. But it doesn't matter. You have the best seat, although it's always a bit concerning when sitting next to an emergency door. What if you accidentally knocked it while asleep and opened it? Relax, it's actually impossible to open these doors while flying. The air pressure inside pushes against every square inch of the cabin. On the door itself, this pressure equates to 1,000 pounds across every square foot of the door. But even if you somehow developed Hulk-like strength in your sleep, you still wouldn't be able to open it as there's a series of electrical and mechanical devices that latch it closed. The extra measures are important as the moment the door opens, the entire cabin temperature would quickly drop, and that drastic change in pressure would weaken the plane's structure. It's time for takeoff, and they've asked you to turn your phone off. Should you really? 10% of people have admitted that they don't turn theirs off and don't even set them to airplane mode. Cell phones can cause issues, but they don't disrupt the electronics as you might believe. There is a genuine concern that while you're flying in the air, your phone can receive signals from multiple towers on the ground, providing stronger distractions for the pilots. So let's make their job a little easier and turn it off. The plane has reached 40,000 feet, your ears have popped, and the seatbelt sign is turned off. The flight attendant walks down the aisle with their arms held outward. Within such a thin passage, they walk this way as it helps with their balance. They try to avoid disrupting passengers, so they don't use the headrest of the seats. And in case of sudden turbulence, there are special grabbing spots under the overhead luggage bay. It's estimated that 500,000 people are flying in the sky at any given time. So right now, you're part of that special group involving 0.1% of the world's population. You look out the window and notice the white wings. Planes are painted white and other lighter colors as well to help reflect solar radiation. This avoids damage from the sun by reducing the amount of heat the plane receives.
We'll be experiencing some turbulence.
But further in the distance, dark clouds approach and the plane is heading towards a thunderstorm. Since it's made of metal, it has to be a big electric conductor, right? Thankfully, jets are fitted with an aluminum shell that conducts electricity very well. The cabin's interior is completely shielded from lightning, protecting electrical systems and leaving us carbon-based mammals unhurt. A plane is so perfectly built for electrical storms that it's one of the safest places to be. There haven't been any major incidents from a storm since the 1960s. You're thirsty and you're aware that you should have brought your own water. When aircrafts land at each location, they refill their water supplies. The water quality in a plane is based on where they collected the vital liquid. Many things contribute to the water quality of every airport. Water cabinets, trucks, carts, and hoses all could be of different standards. In 2019, an airline water study found that most airlines weren't providing clean water, so the general recommendation is to only drink water from a sealed bottle and avoid even tea. But the food is perfectly fine. As you sit back down, you notice the cabin is cold. Super cold, to be honest. It's intentionally set to around 71 degrees Fahrenheit, for a good reason. When people become vulnerable to fainting, it's due to not receiving enough oxygen. And when there's warm air mixed with high cabin pressure, fainting becomes more common. So, while the cold air is helping those who need it, you've been provided with a blanket for your comfort. Warmed up with a blanket, you notice the dry air running through your nose, and it dehydrates your lips and eyes. But don't worry, the air is completely safe and very clean. 40% of the air is recycled and goes through a thorough cleaning system to remove all dust and airborne bacteria, and the other 60% comes from the outside. The humidity levels in the air get very low, and that's why you feel all that discomfort. It's now dark outside as the plane begins its descent to land, and the lights are dimmed. The dimmed lights aren't for the pilots or crew or those at the airport. They're for you. If something goes wrong while landing when it's dark, they'll have to start an emergency procedure. The dimmed lights are there to help your eyes adjust and help you follow towards the exit in the dark easier. But luckily, today, it won't be necessary, as your journey has come to an end. Is the sky like a desert? Can a commercial aircraft fly faster than the speed of sound? Can you fix a plane with a piece of tape? Let's check your intuition with this cool truth or myth airplane quiz. Make sure to note down your correct answers and share your score in the comments. So, the first one for you. Commercial airplanes are more fuel efficient than your car. True or false? That's actually true. Commercial flights have been more fuel efficient per person per mile than cars for more than a decade. Better technologies and a larger number of people that fit in one plane have decreased the energy intensity of traveling by air by almost 74%. As for cars, it's been just a 57% drop. Okay, how about this one? There's no row 13 on a plane. Well, come to think of it, I've never seen a 13A or any other letter on my boarding pass. What about you? That's true, but only partially. In those countries where the number 13 is considered unlucky, there's really no row 13. But in other countries, the missing number may differ depending on what is believed to bring bad luck there. Opening a plane door during the flight is a real safety risk. It sounds kinda terrifying to me, but is it true? You can relax, that's just a myth. For one thing, the doors are locked, but even if they weren't, no one can open the door of a flying plane. It's physically impossible. The cabin pressure won't allow anybody to do it. When an airplane is at cruising altitude, it's pressurized. The difference between the inside and outside is huge. In other words, the pressure inside the cabin pushes on the door and doesn't allow anyone to open it from the inside. Even better, the airplane door is called a plug door. Its inner edge is wider than the outer. That's why it acts like a bathtub drain stopper, corking the doorway without falling through. Your skin is drier on a plane than it would be in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Can you believe this? And if you think this is true, you're absolutely right. The airplane cabin is pressurized, and the humidity there is set to 20%. For comparison, in the Sahara Desert, the average air humidity is around 25%, and your skin is used to at least 40% of humidity. That's why your nose and throat feel so dry when you're flying. Several years ago, someone posted a photo on the internet that became viral in no time. In this image, there was an airline technician, and he seemed to be fixing a plane with duct tape. So the question is, could it be true? Or was it just a fake? The answer isn't so simple. It wasn't your regular duct tape, so partially, this fact is a myth. But it was some kind of tape, known as speed tape. It costs around $700 per roll. It's actually an aluminum adhesive you can use to temporarily mend minor damage, until you can repair it properly. Is it true that pilots avoid the Bermuda Triangle? After all, it has such a notorious reputation. Ships and planes simply disappear into thin air in this region. This one is certainly a myth. Today, people already know that there's no particular danger in the Bermuda Triangle, and planes fly over this area as usual. Airplanes mostly fly on their own, with autopilots doing all the work. Myth or truth? What's your bet? It's a widespread myth. Many people are sure that planes are some super automated mechanisms that can fly mostly by themselves, and pilots are there simply for backup. In reality, though, flying is a hands-on job. It needs constant attention and a skilled flight crew. There once was a plane that flew twice faster than the speed of sound. Can it be true, or is it too far-fetched? This fact is definitely not a myth. The Concorde could reach a speed of 1,330 miles per hour. That's much faster than the speed of sound, which is around 767 miles per hour. And that's indeed almost twice as slow as the Concorde. You might have heard this scary fact before. Planes empty toilets right in the air. Sounds alarming, but is it true? Fortunately, that's only a myth. There's absolutely nothing to this legend. Airplane toilets use a vacuum-based system to transport all the contents out of the bowl and into a special tank. It's located in the rear part of the aircraft, and this tank gets emptied only on the ground. This is a tricky one. When a plane is flying towards the east, it can reach higher speeds. So, can the speed really depend on the direction? And this is true. It's possible thanks to high-altitude winds known as jet streams. They blow at a speed of 100 to 300 miles per hour, and since our planet rotates from west to east, aircraft moving in the same direction can use these winds to move faster. Do you think pilots can control airflow to keep passengers sleepy and relaxed and save on fuel? This one is definitely a myth. If you ask a pilot this question, you might hear "ridiculous" in reply. The truth is that pressurization determines the oxygen level in the cabin. How about this one? The world's tallest air traffic control tower is as high as a skyscraper. Can it be true, or is it just an impressive myth? I know it's hard to believe, but it's actually true. When an airplane lands, it needs the assistance of runway lights and airport beacons. It's part of the responsibilities of the air traffic control tower. It also manages ground traffic. No wonder such construction needs to be extra tall. The new Bangkok International Airport in Thailand has a 430-foot tall tower. Its height is almost the same as the height of a 40-story building. It cost $18 million to build the tower. I've got another tough one for you. The sensitivity of your taste buds dropped by 30% during the flight. Yes or no? This is true. The pressure in the cabin combined with the dryness of the air kinda numbs your taste buds. But the most curious thing here is that this mostly affects salty and sweet flavors. If you're served something spicy or bitter, you can still taste it as usual. Airline caterers try to take the decreased sensitivity of your taste buds into account while preparing airplane meals. They have to modify lots of good old recipes to make your food taste better. As soon as your oxygen mask is on, in case the cabin is depressurized, you can relax and breathe out. You can still use it till the end of the flight. I wish it was true, but is it? Sadly, it's a myth. Passenger oxygen masks usually provide enough air to breathe normally for 10 to 15 minutes. In other words, it's just a temporary solution. But in most cases, this time is enough for the plane to go down to the altitude of 10,000 feet. That's where people can breathe without using oxygen masks. And since planes descend very fast, the need for additional oxygen lasts for a few minutes at most. By the way, the oxygen system gets tested regularly during special maintenance checks. Plus, both passengers and pilots' oxygen flow doesn't depend on electricity. Masks use individual oxygen generators, so even if there's some electrical problem on board, the oxygen doesn't get cut off. Many people say that the plane is the safest means of travel, but do you believe in it? That's a myth. Flying is the second safest. Studies show that the elevator is safer. Unfortunately, it won't be able to take you to the Bahamas. Okay, this last one was kind of a joke. Statistically, planes are indeed the safest way to get to your destination. So, how many correct answers did you have? Tell me in the comments below. Me, 8. Duh.
Want to catch a glimpse of what flying might look like in the future? Then you're in the right place. Economy class lie-flat bunk beds, vertical flying vehicles, AI-powered in-flight meal service. Buckle up and let's start our flight. But first, I need to ask you, have you ever heard of the Crystal Cabin Awards? Oh, those are like the Oscars of aviation interior design. And here are some of the most recent winners. Meet Skynest, a lie-flat bed for people traveling in economy class. These nests are supposed to be used on long-haul flights. The design is based on a sleep pod island located in the middle of the plane. And you can book a 4-hour time slot if you want to take a real nap during your flight. The best news is that this design is likely to be introduced next year. While traveling in premium economy on long routes, you'll be able to use smarter seating design. It includes wider seats and twin armrests, which means no more fighting for space with your neighbors. Plus, there will be fully flexible rows with cushions that can be elevated, creating lie-flat beds. Lufthansa Group has promised that premium passengers will be able to book suites with double beds and travel on temperature-controllable heated or cooled seats. As you see, these days, airline companies are working hard on new designs of aircraft cabins, and it might impact the entire future of air travel. At the moment, they focus on travelers' experience within the walls of the plane. As a result, we have some mind-boggling products. Check out Singapore Airlines first-class suites, or Air France's La Première cabin, which is believed to become one of the best first-class cabins in the skies. It's going to feature suites equipped with separate sofas and chairs, and each suite will have 5 windows along the cabin wall. This will make it the longest first-class suite in the world. But then, Airbus went and patented the idea of a more interactive flight experience, especially for those lucky passengers occupying window seats. With the help of special eye-tracking equipment, the aircraft might be able to highlight significant objects you're looking at and provide you with detailed information, appearing on a semi-transparent display on the window. The patent also claims that you could send data to devices connected by Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. This way, takeoffs and landings would get much more exciting, and you'd be able to get information about a new country or city. Qatar Airlines, in turn, came up with the idea of Q suites. It looks like this. On the sides, you have individual suites, while the middle part can be transformed. You can choose to have a double suite to travel together with your partner, or you can have some private space, or even move the walls and turn the place into a quad suite that you can use for a meeting. There might also be some improvements in economy class. They're bound to bring more comfort, especially on a long-haul flight. A company called Zodiac Seats filed a patent based on a zigzag configuration of seats. Look at this aisle, which contains 3 and 4 seats, with each of them facing in the opposite direction. This allows for way more shoulder space than regular seating. Plus, passengers have a lot of leg space. Yes, some people might feel a bit uncomfortable having to face their neighbor for more than 8 hours straight, but aren't these space improvements worth it? Now, you might know that moving around the cabin while flight attendants are serving meals and beverages is kind of tricky. Plus, you have to eat at a specific time with everyone else. Or, if you're not feeling hungry, forego the meal altogether. Well, robots might be the solution. One company has suggested using perfectly sized pods that could slide along the rail in the middle of the aisle, delivering drinks and food ordered by passengers. This way, you could get your meal at the most suitable time for you without leaving your seat. This solution is likely to solve the problems with meal service. Even better, it might allow for fewer galleys in large planes. Unfortunately, this idea was filed 60 years ago and hasn't been implemented yet, so maybe it's not as great as it sounds. Another idea connected with in-flight meal service includes using AI. According to its creators, the technology will record what passengers leave on their trays, and later use this data to suggest various catering plans on subsequent flights. Now, even though these innovations sound like they're going to make traveling way more comfortable, they're not exactly revolutionary. But look at these innovations. Vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Hyundai Transys's air taxi cabin concept optimizes space and prioritizes your privacy in a shared cabin. If we talk about short flights, there's City Airbus Next Gen. That's an all-electric, vertical takeoff and landing vehicle with 4 seats based on the lift and cruise concept. It can operate within the range of 50 miles and has a cruise speed of 74 miles per hour. Another amazing prospect is passenger aircraft with AI co-pilots, or even pilots. Some experts claim that planes could potentially be flown on a fully automated basis. Not everyone agrees with this idea, though. A skilled pilot is part of a complicated safety system that reduces risks and keeps passengers safe. Pilots have to be navigators, technicians, engineers, and weather experts. On a regular working day, a pilot needs to deal with ground crew, other air crew, cabin crew, air traffic control, and passengers. That's a lot. And don't forget that they need to communicate well, not only in aviation terms, but also on an interpersonal level. Will AI be able to do the same? Time will tell. But let's get back to the boldest ideas about the future of air travel. Some experts think that sometime around 2040, you'll be able to catch a hypersonic plane ride. Lots of people believe that the era of supersonic planes finished in 2003 when the Concorde commercial airplane was decommissioned after decades of being unprofitable. But it seems the situation might change soon. New supersonic aircraft will fly at incredible heights, and their speed is likely to be at least 6 times the speed of any other passenger plane. Traveling from New York to London, in this case, will take less than 2 hours. By comparison, these days, it takes a conventional airplane 8 hours to fly from one of these cities to the other. There is one problem, though. The supersonic plane tickets will cost a lot, and statistically, people tend to prioritize price over speed. So, experts don't think that a lot of people will be eager to pay a few $1,000s to get from London to Sydney in 4 hours. Plus, such planes will need a lot of liquid hydrogen fuel, and at the moment, it's not cheap. By the way, you might not recognize a plane from 2050. These flying machines will keep changing for the next several decades, and the chances are high that, at some moment, windows will start to disappear from airplanes altogether. This way, aircraft will become stronger and better suited for high speeds. Windows make planes heavier, which results in larger fuel consumption. No wonder cargo planes don't have windows. Planes will also become sleeker and will likely be covered with solar panels. There's also a concept of a plane with its cabin made out of transparent polymers. I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd ever board such a plane. Talk about aerophobia. The chances are that in a few decades, we'll see a hypersonic plane with a jet engine that can turn into a rocket, that can fly into space. Liquid oxygen would get injected into the exhaust, turning the engine into a rocket. It would help the aircraft reach enormous speeds, and on the way back, the engine would turn into a regular jet engine once again.
Okay, shocker. Airplanes don't take off with the wind, but actually against it. I'd think that if you take off with the wind, it pushes you forwards and helps you fly faster, but this is wrong. So I did some digging for us. We should think of an airplane as a kind of kite. To make a kite fly, you launch it against the wind, and so it flies. Here's how it works. There are 4 forces of flight: lift, weight, thrust, and drag. The lifting force is generated because of the differences above and below the kite. Above the kite, the speed of air is higher than below it. So, the pressure below is higher than that of the pressure above, and the kite is pushed forwards. This is the lifting force. There's also an opposing force, the force generated by gravitation that pushes the object down. That one is called weight. The thrust is the force that pushes the object forward. In the case of a kite, it's generated by the string, the wind, and the forward motion you're making. In the case of an airplane, the thrust force is generated by the engines. Finally, drag is the opposing force of thrust. So, to launch a kite into the air, the lifting force must be greater than that of the force of weight. Then, to stay in the air, all 4 must stay in balance. Lift must be equal to weight, thrust must be equal to drag. The moment the plane takes off, going against the wind helps to generate the needed lifting force faster. Yes, going against the wind does decrease the ground speed of an aircraft, but that's not the speed we need. An airplane flies due to the speed of air flowing over the wings. This airflow isn't generated by the plane's engines, but by the wind. And the higher the airflow, the higher the lift. Going against the wind increases the flow of air over the aircraft's wings, giving it an additional lift and allowing it to achieve a higher altitude in less time because it takes off at a greater angle. The same works for landing. Landing against the wind lets a pilot to descend at a shorter distance in a shorter time. The airflow and the lifting force are the things that are responsible for turbulence. The direction and speed of the wind, and therefore the airflow, isn't constant over time. Sometimes it changes pretty quickly, like 100 times per second. So one moment there's more lift, and the other moment there's less lift, and then the plane is shaking. This is called the turbulence zone. It's not dangerous at all, it just means that you fly through the zone of a highly constant wind, and that's all. So if a pilot is given the option of how to take off, they'd pick to take off into the wind. It's not always the case, and it's not a problem taking off with the wind, but going into it helps a lot. Many airports are designed so that most runways are taking the direction opposing the most typical wind direction of the area. Also, taking off and landing are the most dangerous stages of any flight. That's because the pilot has less time and space to react to any occurring problems. In the air, even if both engines stopped working, a plane won't just start falling. Instead, it'll start gliding through the sky, losing about 1 mile of altitude for every 10 of them going forward. So, the pilot will have about 8 minutes to react and find a safe place to land. During takeoff and landing, the time is limited. If an engine fails, the pilot will have seconds to decide if they should still take off and deal with the problems in the air or cancel the flight. The thing is that canceling isn't even always possible, even if something happens. If the plane has already reached a speed of 100 miles per hour, it can't possibly be stopped before the runway ends. Physics. And getting out of the runway isn't good. Flying is costly, so not only the passengers, but the airline as well wants to make the flight as fast and short as possible. So there's no surprise here, there's always the most efficient way to go from point A to point B. And the shortest way is, of course, a straight line. Now look at some aircraft routes. These don't exactly look straight, but don't let this trick you. We have to keep in mind that the Earth isn't flat like we see on a map, it's a sphere. So these lines only appear like arcs when we project them on a map. In reality, they're pretty much straight. If there's an efficient way, this means that every airline and every plane wants to fly this way. But there are hundreds of planes going from North America to Europe every day, and many go at the same time. Turns out, the air highway is pretty busy. So how come the planes never collide? That's because before a flight starts, the crew make a strict flight plan that is uploaded to the aircraft's computer, and that pilot will have to follow. To be completely honest, there are several of them, just to have options if something goes wrong. What helps to avoid any colliding is that the airspace is three-dimensional, and the planes don't only fly in several lines as cars, but also at different altitudes. Air traffic is managed by dispatchers who watch for planes and control that they don't get closer to each other than 3 miles. There's also flight level regulations. All the westbound flights fly at even-numbered altitudes, like for example 34,000 feet or 36,000 feet, and all eastbound flights fly at odd-number altitudes, like 35,000 feet and 37,000 feet. This means that there's a couple of thousand feet between the planes flying in the same direction. To share the sky safely, each aircraft has to follow their own airway that even has a specific name. There are also some parts of the air that are especially busy, having remarkably high traffic because many planes fly there every minute. So, whenever an aircraft enters a busy zone, it has to stick to a very specific route. So, usually, commercial aircrafts fly on the altitude between 31,000 and 38,000 feet. This altitude is reached within the first 10 minutes of the flight. So, why so high? With height, the air gets thinner, so the plane faces less resistance and can fly faster and burn less fuel. Another reason that they fly so high is that the plane avoids most of the weather patterns that usually happen way lower. High winds and rain happen in the troposphere, the atmospheric layer that is closest to the ground. Planes fly just a little bit above, but already in the next layer, the stratosphere. Since most of the weather phenomenon are avoided, the flight is smoother and there's less turbulence. But then why don't they fly even higher? Remember the force of weight that pushes the object down. An aircraft is very heavy, and the more you weigh, the harder it is to get higher, because the force is stronger. To push it even higher, more fuel will be needed, and that's inefficient. Also, the oxygen becomes too sparse to fuel the engines, so the planes usually fly the most efficient way, high enough to avoid the weather patterns, but not much higher so that they don't spend too much fuel. If you've ever flown, you've probably noticed those little holes on the windows. An airplane window has 3 panes of plexiglass. That tiny hole is only in the one that's in the middle. It exists to regulate the huge pressure difference inside and outside the cabin. This way, the outer plane can handle the load. If the outer pane breaks, the middle one will keep the window intact. Also, that hole also keeps the windows from fogging up. Have you noticed that whenever you enter the plane, you enter it from the left side? It's not random. Firstly, the captain usually sits on the left side of the airplane cabin, so it's easier for the captain to align the plane with the terminal jet bridge from that side. Also, the aircraft is fueled and loaded with the baggage on the right side. With passengers loading the plane from the left side, the crew can do their job undisturbed.
Welcome aboard our flight from London to Miami. It will take us 4 hours and 30 minutes. The weather in Miami is... Wait, did the pilot just say 4 hours and a half? It sounds like a dream, but it will most likely become our reality in less than 10 years from now. Boom Supersonic, an aircraft manufacturer, is working on a passenger supersonic jet called the Overture that will be able to carry 65 to 80 people at twice the speed of current commercial aircraft. One of the major American airlines is interested in buying around 40 planes. The plane that's going to cost $200 million has recently passed the wind tunnel tests. If all goes well, the first finished Overture prototype will roll off the line in 2025 and will travel at nearly twice the speed of sound. The plane will be able to show its top speed over the sea, so it should be ideal for transatlantic flights. And then, traveling from, say, New York to Paris should take no longer than 4 hours. But first, it will have to get all the official permissions to do it. Some people are skeptical about the whole passenger superjet concept as they remember the story of the Concorde. That high-end plane delivered people from London to New York in about 3 hours and serviced other transatlantic connections. The tickets cost a whopping $10,000 per seat, and passengers got access to a super exclusive lounge with lobster and Angus beef for lunch. The Concorde went on its final commercial flight in 2003. It was a huge fuel guzzler. Plus, there are many complaints from people living near airports about the noise it produced. The Overture is supposed to be more fuel efficient, lighter, and have better software to make it more aerodynamic. The noise might still be a problem though, because supersonic aircraft need aerodynamic engines, which are pretty loud. That will definitely change in the future, as planes have gone a long way since their first flight in 1903. Back then, the Wright brothers started the aerial age with a 12-second flight traveling 120 feet in North Carolina. The top speed at that time was around 30 miles per hour, but it still seemed pretty impressive. The world's first passenger airline service took off just 11 years later. The flight from St. Petersburg, Florida to Tampa, Florida lasted 23 minutes. Covering the distance by car around the bay took about 20 hours, so that was a great time saver. The tickets cost $5 and were sold out 16 weeks in advance, but the airline went out of business in 4 months. The new age in aviation began in the 1950s when they introduced the turbofan engine. It became possible as they started using temperature-resistant materials and complex air cooling systems. Planes also became lighter as they were made of composite materials. The wings have also improved over the years. The airfoil, that's the part thanks to which the air travels faster above the wing than below it, became a real game changer. Thanks to it, the planes keep a low speed during takeoff, which means they move smoothly and burn less fuel. The fastest plane in the world so far is North American X-15. It was rocket-powered and made of aluminum and titanium. A huge wedge tail helped it stay stable at that super speed. The rocket plane set the world's altitude record, reaching an altitude of 67 miles. Oh, and to make it even more impressive, it happened back in 1967. So, if it was possible back then already, why don't we all just fly rocket planes? Or at least supersonics, especially on long-distance flights? In terms of speed, passenger planes are still where they were 50 years ago. Mostly because speeding flights up would also make them way more expensive. Flying faster means burning more fuel. Plus, supersonic engines are expensive to produce and maintain. Another reason is natural forces. The winds affect the speed of a plane, and no technology can control the wind. A strong tailwind can help it move forward at a higher speed, and a headwind can slow the aircraft down. Planes mostly fly at altitudes of up to 7 miles. Up there, the air is thinner, which means there's less resistance, and a plane can fly faster and save some fuel. Also, the lower temperatures make the jet engines more efficient. Another perk of flying through that part of the atmosphere is that it's less turbulent, so flights go smoother. Private jets can't fly that high. They're smaller, and their engines aren't strong enough to reach such an altitude, so they stick around to 15,000 feet. Ever notice those white trails that planes leave behind? Their official name is contrails, and they're like artificial clouds planes leave behind. When the plane reaches its cruising altitude, temperatures get quite low, about -67 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water turns into particles of ice. The higher the level of humidity is, the bigger those trails get, and you can see them long after the plane has disappeared. So, thick and long contrails can be a sign of an upcoming storm. Sometimes contrails can even be colorful. The droplets of water that are formed up in the atmosphere can freeze in different sizes. They all reflect sunlight at different wavelengths, causing the effect of a rainbow. When all the colors mix, it appears white, the most common contrail color. Airplanes don't take off with the wind, but actually against it. It's kinda like a kite. To make it fly, you launch it against the wind, and there it goes. That's because there are 4 forces of flight: lift, weight, thrust, and drag. The lift is generated because the speed of the air is higher above the kite than below it. The kite is pushed upwards. This is the lifting force. Going through a storm is one pretty scary experience, but is it really as dangerous as it seems? In fact, the most critical moments in windy weather are takeoff and landing. Plane manufacturers test their aircraft and specify speed limits at which the pilots should move in different weather conditions. At some airports, the winds are pretty severe all year round, so landing can get pretty wobbly. It requires a real pro of a pilot to land when the wind strikes the runway. Sometimes, the wind unexpectedly changes its speed and direction. The pilot really has to know what they're doing to land when the wind direction changes. Otherwise, the risk of overshooting the runway is pretty real. Extreme heat is another weather condition that can stop a plane from flying. Airplanes fly by generating lift with their wings. The air below the wings takes the plane up. In extreme heat, an airplane can't produce that much lift. That's because hot air expands and becomes way less dense than cold air. With less lift, the plane may find it really hard to take off and fly. Electronics will unlikely respond well to extreme heat or humidity, and the AC system may fail. Smaller jets can't operate at a temperature of over 118 degrees Fahrenheit. Larger Airbus and Boeing planes perform the best below 126 degrees Fahrenheit. Those mysterious chimes you hear during the flight are a kind of a secret language the crew uses to communicate with each other. The chime you hear shortly after takeoff informs the crew that the landing gear is getting retracted. A single chime during the flight is a sign that one of the passengers needs the assistance of the crew. When they're serving meals and run out of food and drinks, they can ask their colleagues to share, using a high and low chime combo. 3 low tones means serious turbulence is approaching, so the crew needs to buckle up. Have you ever noticed the flashing light in the cabin before takeoff? You have nothing to worry about. It occurs when the pilot disconnects a plane from the airport power supply and it switches to the onboard one. This rapid transition may cause flashing.
Pilots can't eat similar meals when they're working. Imagine that you're on a transoceanic flight. The airplane is flying over the Pacific Ocean. Flight attendants deliver the dinner meals. Everyone is enjoying the pasta. The sauce tastes a bit funny though. that's probably okay. After all, you are eating an aircraft meal. It can't taste like a 5-star chef plate. Time goes by. Oh no! You were right! Something was indeed wrong with the food. But if all the passengers have the same problem, so do the pilots. To prevent both of them being out of order, pilots are advised not to eat the same meal at the same time. In such a scenario, if one pilot feels bad, the other one can take over. I mean, this is not an imperative rule stated by the Federal Aviation Administration, but most airlines make their own rules about this matter. Flight attendants have access to hidden equipment, such as a defibrillator, supplemental oxygen, a fire extinguisher, and duct tape. But probably the most interesting gear they have is handcuffs. These objects are there to protect passengers from others, and sometimes from themselves. Turns out that flight attendants have everything they need to defuse a troublemaker. Aviator sunglasses look cool on pilots in movies, but in real life, they don't wear polarized glasses. First off, they have a glare-reducing effect. This can cause some trouble in the cockpit. A pilot has to read instruments, but the stuff in the cockpit, such as LCD displays, emits polarized light. So a pilot with those cool polarized glasses can't read the displays with 100% efficiency. Pilots shouldn't wear these glasses simply because of safety concerns. Imagine a shimmer of glare coming from another plane's windscreen, but the pilot missed the sign because of polarized sunglasses. Ever noticed a hole in the tail of an airplane? Well, most commercial airplanes have it. Next time you get into an airplane, take a closer look. The hole has a fancy name, auxiliary power unit. It looks like a hole from the outside, but that is actually a hidden turbine engine. Most of the time, the APU will remain off for the entire flight. It will start working when the plane lands. It provides power to the cabin lights, air conditioning, and cockpit electronics. Don't underestimate the APU's power, though. It can also provide the power required to start the main engines. You've watched a Brightside video and learned what the APU is. A perfect icebreaker. Unfortunately, you're not in a chatty mood. You just want to take the plane, land, and start your vacation. Yet again, there is only one door to board. You are at the end of a queue. Why don't planes generally have multiple doors? According to the experts, the biggest issue is that the bridge takes up a lot of space. When an aircraft is loaded from the front and the rear, it takes up 2 slots. This is not ideal for the administrators. Newly remodeled or constructed terminals tend to have dual boarding compared to the older terminals. Change of scenery, let's jump into a cruise ship. There are hidden passageways and secret doors in ships. These secrets are from an insider. Staff on the ship mostly work in their designated area. How does a worker get from one place to another without using the stairs and doors that the passengers use? There is a network of corridors and stairs all around the ship, used only by the crew. I mean it when I say secret doors. They blend with the walls, so they go undetected by those who don't know where the door is. Maybe you can stumble by accident. Here's a clue. Pay attention to the walls near the guest stairs. Try to think of those gigantic cruise ships as floating metals. This leads me to a cruise cabin fun fact. The walls of the cruise ship cabin are magnetic. Imagine you're traveling to multiple countries on board a cruise ship, a single-month voyage. You collect destination-themed magnets and decorate your cabin. True cruise fans know this magnet magic, so they put a couple of magnetic hooks into their luggage. Neat tip, use magnetic hooks to add extra storage in your cabin. Hang clothes and accessories, postcards, or hats. Speaking of ships, why do some ships and boats have small holes constantly releasing water? To keep the bilge free of water. Water builds up over time inside the bilge, and the bilge pump automatically pumps the water out again. Ships don't have headlights. Using a headlight could prevent accidents. If they work for cars, why not for ships? Headlights are the source of light, but the light that comes out of them bounces back at the light source at some point. With cars, for instance, headlights work because the area you want lit is narrow, and you can easily take action if you see an obstacle on the road. For ships, this is super hard. The light source should be powerful enough to light the area the captain wants to see. Large cargo ships, for instance, need more than a mile to stop or take action. Plus, imagine how much brighter should the ship's light be to light the whole area in front of it. They do see each other with different sorts of lights called navigation lights. These are small but practical. They arrange it in a standardized way so that ships could see each other. The exciting thing is that they don't just notice one another in the dark, they also understand each other's movements and directions. Here's an example. Imagine a ship with two nav lights. The one on the front is lower, near the ship floor. The other one on the back is high up. This means the vessel goes to the right. It can safely pass by the other ships without hitting them. Trains don't have seatbelts. A bit weird. Every time there is a crash related to trains, this matter comes up. Pretty much nowhere in the world seatbelts are used on trains. Various studies have been made about this issue. Some of them created simulations of accidents, and the results were surprising. Using a seatbelt on a train could potentially increase the number of injuries. In cars, seatbelts are highly effective in protecting the passenger and are used all the time. The logic behind the seatbelt is to protect the person when a collision causes rapid deceleration. But trains carry so much momentum that they don't stop rapidly. On a plane, passengers use a seatbelt on takeoff, during landing, and if turbulence occurs. There are no such things for trains. Entering and leaving a station is not a high risk. Experts believe focusing and making investments are other ways to improve railway safety. Now, you are traveling by train. You look outside the window. There are small stones along the railway tracks to accompany you on the journey. Those stones are formally known as track ballast. They do a very important job. They provide support to and maintain the tracks. They're not there by mere coincidence, though. Now look at the stones closer. You can notice that there is no single smoothly cut stone on the tracks, because they're not regular stones randomly poured at the rails. Each rock has sharp and abrupt edges. Sharp edges hold on to each other. They protect the railroad from harsh concussions. They facilitate water drainage in heavy rain and keep down the grass and other weeds. Now imagine replacing those with round pebbles. They will slide down. Eventually, the ballast will spread out and tracks will fall apart. The last thing you would want, especially if you were a passenger on that train.
The plane had been in the air for a mere 25 seconds when the pilots noticed weird noises and bizarre vibrations. They tried several ways to improve the situation, but nothing worked. The engine surges continued, and just over a minute into the flight, when the plane reached 3,000 feet, both engines failed. First the right one, 2 seconds later the left one. The pilots decided to return to the airport they had just left. At the same time, they tried to restart the engines. Nothing seemed to work. The flight crew made a decision to pitch the plane down and then level it off. Perhaps it could help them gain some speed for the glide. But soon, they realized they wouldn't make it to the airport. Was the plane going to crash? That's when the miracle at Gotrura occurred. The morning before the flight started as usual. Regular pre-flight procedures, good weather. The members of the flight crew were experienced pilots. A 44-year-old Danish captain with over 8,000 flight hours under his belt, and a 34-year-old first officer from Sweden with 3,000 hours. So, what could go wrong? The plane itself was almost brand new. It was a McDonnell Douglas MD-81 nicknamed Dana Viking. It made its first flight on March 16, 1991. By that fateful day, the aircraft had been in service for a mere 9 months. There were 122 passengers and 7 crew members on board. Flight 751 Scandinavian Airlines was a scheduled flight from Stockholm, Sweden to Warsaw, Poland. On the way, the plane was supposed to make a stop in Copenhagen, Denmark. The aircraft took off from Stockholm according to its schedule at 8:47 a.m. local time. But by that point, the people inside had already been doomed, all because of a terrible sequence of events before the departure. It started the night before. The plane arrived at Stockholm Airport after a flight from Zurich. It was 10:09 p.m. The aircraft spent the night at the gate outside. It was cold. The temperature dropped to 34 degrees Fahrenheit, just above freezing. What made the situation even worse was that almost 6,000 pounds of freezing cold fuel, chilled during the night, still remained in the tanks located in the wings. The fuel was so cold because the plane had been flying at the cruising altitude, where the air temperature outside the cabin varied from -61 to -80 degrees. The flight from Zurich lasted around 1 hour and 40 minutes. Soon after midnight, a flight technician came to check on the aircraft. The man had to remove some slush from the landing gear, otherwise he wouldn't be able to examine it. At around 2 a.m., when he was leaving, he noticed some ice covering the upper part of the wings. By the morning, the situation had become even dire. A layer of clear, almost invisible ice had formed on the tops of the wings. The plane had to leave the gate at around 8:30 a.m. An hour before the departure, the mechanic responsible for the plane noticed that some ice covered the underside of the wings. He decided to make sure there was no ice on the tops of the wings. He climbed a ladder and put one knee on the wing. Then he bent forward to touch the front part of the wing. There was no ice, just some slush. The mechanic decided to make sure everything was fine with the air inlet of one of the engines. He didn't find anything abnormal. Soon after that, the personnel used more than 220 gallons of de-icing fuel to remove ice from the plane. The mechanic consulted with the captain of the aircraft and ordered the staff to de-ice the underside of the wings as well. After all, he had seen some ice there. But no one thought to double-check if there was clear ice on the tops of the wings. After they had finished the procedure, the mechanic reported to the captain, "We're done here. De-icing finished. There was a lot of snow and ice, but everything's clear now." The captain thanked the mechanic and carried on with the pre-flight procedures. The plane taxied to the runway. Its engine's anti-ice systems were switched on and didn't show any malfunction. But several passengers later claimed they had seen ice sliding off the upper side of the wings while the plane had been taking off. And still, the plane left the ground and headed for Stockholm as usual. But shortly after the takeoff, several pieces of the overlooked ice broke off. At full speed, they slammed into the fans of the engines near the tail on both sides of the plane, ruining the blades. It led to a series of surges, and the rest is history. Meanwhile, somewhere in the cabin, Scandinavian Airlines flight captain Per Holmberg, who was on board as a passenger, noticed something was amiss. At first, he informed the flight attendant sitting in the rear jump seat that the right engine was surging. She tried to contact the flight crew, unsuccessfully. Then, the ununiformed captain rushed to the cockpit and asked if he could help the pilots. The first officer gave him the emergency checklist, and the captain asked him to start the auxiliary power unit, a small gas turbine in the tail of the plane. Holmberg's advice and help were invaluable, but was it enough to save the plane and the people inside? When the plane emerged from the cloud cover at an altitude of 890 feet, the pilots realized they wouldn't have enough time to make it back to the airport. An immediate emergency landing was unavoidable. The assisting captain passed the order to the cabin crew, and they started preparing the passengers. There was a large field to the north of the plane, but the captain realized they didn't have enough time to reach it. So he chose a much smaller field in a forested area in the direction of flight. It was not far from the village of Gotrura in Uppland, Sweden. The plane was just 1,300 feet above the ground when the assisting captain started extending the flaps. At a height of 183 feet, the captain reported to Stockholm Control, "We're crashing to the ground." 7 seconds later, the plane hit several trees and lost a huge chunk of its right wing. By that time, the landing gear had already been extended and the speed had decreased to 139 miles per hour. Moments later, the plane's tail struck the ground and broke off. The aircraft kept sliding across the field, still at high speed. It traveled 360 feet, with its main landing gear leaving marks on the field. At one point, the plane lost the main and nose landing gear. Its fuselage broke into 3 parts. Miraculously, there was no fire. If you look at the pictures from the crash site, the plane torn into pieces, with its parts scattered across the field, it's hard to believe that all 129 people on board the plane survived. It seems like a miracle. but it was also thanks to the flight attendants' quick reaction and the correct instructions they gave the passengers. They didn't panic and told the people to adopt the brace position just in time to avoid fatalities. Even more surprising, almost all passengers, except for 4 people, made their way out of the plane on their own. No wonder this accident was nicknamed the Miracle. The aircraft, though, wasn't as lucky. The 9-month-old plane was damaged so badly that it was an immediate write-off. Everyone praised the actions of the flight crew. The landing was incredibly skilled, especially in such a fast-developing, very dangerous situation. The captain himself admitted that few pilots were ever forced to put to the test the skills they got during training, at least not to this degree. He said he was proud of his crew and relieved that everyone had survived, and he never returned to piloting commercial planes. All right, window seat on a flight to Hawaii. You get comfy and are about to have the flight of your life. As it goes on, you look out to the darkness and can't even see the clouds as you're cruising above the ocean. You notice that the flight attendant is asking everyone to shut the shades on the windows, including yours. The reason is that they want the passengers to be comfortable with the lighting. If an emergency happens, it'll take your eyes more time to adjust if there is light coming from the outside of the plane and the inside. If a power outage happens and the shades are shut, it'll be easier to act since your eyes are adjusted to the surroundings. Every second counts during times like this. Passengers are asked to leave the shades open during takeoffs during the day. And during a day flight, the cabin crew also asks passengers to leave the shades open so that the natural light outside illuminates the plane's interior. Now, there has never been an incident in history where a phone signal interference caused any problems during a flight. The idea is that when you're thousands of feet in the sky, your phone signal will bounce off different towers and the signal will get more powerful. This normally won't be a problem in mid-flight when the pilots aren't doing much work. The real concentration and critical moments are during the landing and the takeoff. The phone signals will just flood the networks on the ground, which will make the pilot's job just a little bit more annoying. Now, it seems to bother you that the windows on the plane are so small given the improved technology over the years. The windows on airplanes are so small relative to the size because they need to maximize the hull between them and increase the strength of the frame. The overall frame over the plane is actually at its strongest if there aren't any windows at all. Metal fatigue occurs over time, originating at the weak points of the plane. The bigger the windows, the weaker the frame. You lift the shades just to take a peek outside. You're so far from the ground, it looks like you're actually closer to space than Earth, but you're only 7% the distance from where astronauts go. Planes can technically go higher than that, but they can't because it won't be good for the passengers and the crew members. Planes can sometimes cause lightning storms during a cloudy flight, but don't worry, you're safe. The static creates lightning whenever a plane passes through, and it can strike while it's moving. But over the years, technological advancements improve the quality of airplanes. The electrical current of lightning is distributed throughout the aluminum structure so that it doesn't affect the controls. Some people start panicking on the flight. All the windows are shut because the flash of lightning is disturbing for many people who are trying to sleep. One person panics a little too much and tries to open the exterior door in mid-flight. Well, this is almost impossible to do because of internal pressure. You'd have to be a superhero to open it up. The plane exits the cloud cluster back into normal sky. The flight attendants are bringing out some dinner. You pull out your tray and wipe it clean. It's reported that this is the dirtiest part of the plane. Nope, not even the toilet. After cleaning it, they serve some chicken and little veggies on the side. The smell is incredible, but when you take a bite, it somehow doesn't taste as good. It's because the difference in air pressure and the low humidity alters your taste buds, especially the sweet tooth part and the salty buds. Only a few hours left until you arrive at your destination. You wake up and the flight attendants ask you to put on your seatbelt and tuck in your tray. The plane lands and parks. You're the last one out and make your way to the baggage claim. The conveyor belt rotates, but you don't see your bags. When flights lose your baggage, there's a pretty good chance that they're still in the location where you traveled from. Occasionally, they can end up on other flights due to human error. The flight agencies can recover your luggage if you file that they're missing. You read the signs on the flight destination screen showing the arrivals and departures. These signs are written in 3 specific fonts so that people can read them from afar while walking. As you continue walking, you stare out into the large window panels. These windows are made of special material. It makes you feel like you're closer to your plane than when you look through regular ones. You notice they're driving the bags to the planes for loading and refueling them before takeoff. They fill up the planes with just enough fuel to take them to their destination, rather than pumping them with a little extra. That's because they need the planes to be as light as possible since fuel is heavy. You head outside and feel the hot wind of Hawaii in your hair. It's only a matter of time before you're dipping your feet in the ocean water. You try to find a taxi, but they're all taken. Taxis are yellow because a salesman in 1907 had a lot of cars in his lot and didn't know what to do with them. He decided to start a taxi business to make use of those idle cars. To make them stand out from the rest of the cars, he decided to color them yellow. According to a survey, yellow cars are the easiest to spot on the street. School buses also use yellow to stick out from the crowd. Colors are important in our daily lives, just like the colors of a traffic light or the flashy red color of a stop sign. But it wasn't always red. In the early 1900s, the red dye wasn't consistent and faded over time, so they used yellow instead. In the 1950s, they finally started using a red color that didn't fade away and white lettering for stop. Well, you finally find a cab and enter. You're so tired and decide to shut your eyes for a bit. Scientists still don't know why we need sleep, but it has to do with resting our brains so that we can function for the next day. You get stuck in traffic and are jolted up by the sound of honking cars. You look out the window and see the ocean filled with people. Instead of waiting in the taxi, you pay your fare, grab your bags that the airline finally found, and head down to the beach. You dip your feet and pick up a large seashell. You put it against your ear to hear the ocean. Of course, you don't exactly hear the ocean, but different frequencies of the ambient noise inside the shell echoing around. The sound just happens to resemble the ocean. You take off your shoes to feel the sand on your feet, but it's so hot that you tiptoe your way to a shady spot. The sand absorbs the heat and can retain it. 85% of sunlight can also reflect off sand and water. You open your bags and get out your towel and lay it on a soft spot. Even though you're sitting in some shade, you're still at risk of getting a sunburn. So you apply some cream to protect yourself. SPF stands for Sun Protection Factor, and the numbers mean how long it will take for the UV rays to affect your skin. After applying it, you dip in the water for a bit and see a large volcano in the distance. The sand around is somewhat black. This is because Hawaii is located in a volcanic range. The color of the sand is determined by the location, environment, and source. Most of the sand in the world is made up of quartz and trillions of particles that used to be rock. The deserts of the world used to be forests millions of years ago, but due to climate changes, everything turned to sand. Some parts of the Sahara Desert still have some geological formations suggesting that there used to be large rivers in the region. Not to mention the discovery of aquatic dinosaurs found in those ancient dry rivers. You're finally settled and sipping on a punchy drink. You see some people surfing the large ocean waves. Surfing was technically invented in Hawaii and later became a popular water sport worldwide. You hang out for a bit until sunset and then head to your hotel to take a long shower. Water was not invented in Hawaii, although it is surrounded by it. It's, an island. Oh boy, you take your seat on the plane and look around. It's a large aircraft, spacious and new. You look up. Something draws your attention to that small compartment above your seat that contains your oxygen mask. Come to think of it, you've only ever seen it during the in-flight safety demonstrations. Maybe it's for the better, you think, and relax into your seat. Screaming and powerful jerks are what wake you up. One of the flight attendants is saying something in an urgent voice, but still disoriented after your nap, you can't catch the meaning of the announcement. And then, right in front of your face, you see an oxygen mask. Uh-oh. You place the mask over your face. You did pay attention to the safety demonstration, Then you grip the armrest and close your eyes, trying to calm down, however impossible it sounds. But do you know what's going on inside your oxygen mask? Well, let's talk about it. An oxygen mask deploys automatically in case of loss of cabin pressure. It might happen for several reasons. For example, some problems with the fuselage or malfunctioning of the valves pumping air into the plane. But most of these incidents aren't life-threatening if the masks deploy as they're supposed to. The problem with the air above 10,000 feet is that it contains too little oxygen for people to breathe. That's why once a plane rises higher than that altitude, the pressurization system springs into action. Its main task is to create the same breathable conditions as at the height of 5,000 to 8,000 feet. Now, if, for some reason, this system fails, oxygen masks drop. If this happens, it's crucial to put your mask on within the first 18 seconds after it deploys. If you procrastinate, you'll feel the effects of hypoxia, low oxygen levels in your blood, very fast. You'll become drowsy. And if you keep ignoring your oxygen mask, you're likely to pass out. Anyway, you acted fast and can now breathe freely. But for how long? And is it really oxygen that you inhale? Well, first of all, you notice with horror that your mask doesn't inflate. No worries, it shouldn't. It's supposed to rise and fall along with your breathing. So everything functions perfectly fine, even if it might seem it's not working. Now, hold on to your hats, here's shocking news. There isn't actually any oxygen in the mask. Instead of the gas, there are several chemicals. When they combine, they mimic good old breathable oxygen. The main reason for using the chemicals is safety issues. This mixture is way less combustible than oxygen tanks. Anyway, the chemical reaction that is happening in a deployed oxygen mask is the reason why you might smell something burning when putting it on. That's the chemicals mixing and forming the new substance. In case of a real fire, your mask simply won't drop. The chemicals inside can, unfortunately, fuel the flames. Oh, and don't forget that in your mask, there's only enough oxygen for 20 minutes at the most. This time is usually enough for the plane to get down to the necessary altitude. When the chemicals in the mask are all used up, the mask stops the flow of air. But by that time, you're already at an altitude where you can breathe without additional help. By the way, oxygen masks are not used too often. On U.S. airlines, it's only been 2,800 cases over a period of 40 years. In other words, additional oxygen was necessary a mere 10 times per 1 billion flight hours. The average cruising altitude of a commercial aircraft is 31,000 to 38,000 feet. Why can't planes climb higher than that? Well, it's not that they can't, they simply don't. Because pilots can't count that high. No, not really. It's because if they did go higher, there would be serious safety issues. First of all, if a plane is flying very high, it takes much more time to get back to a safe altitude. During an emergency, like rapid decompression, when every second counts, it can become a serious issue. Plus, while traveling at altitudes higher than 38,000 feet, planes can't communicate with the ground services as well as they do when flying lower. At lower altitudes, planes can also partially rely on wind, and if they rise too high without any additional support, they waste too much fuel to stay in the air. Once a plane climbs too high, the air can't provide enough lift to keep the machine going. The lift is created by the difference in air pressure, but at high altitudes, this difference is simply not enough. Air may not look like something real because it's nothing material, like metal or plastic. And still, it's one of the things that keeps planes aloft. Let's say a plane is heading for space. Ooh! It has large, cleverly designed wings and super powerful engines. But the higher it goes, the thinner the air becomes until there's hardly any air left. And then nothing can support the plane and help it go further if there is a near vacuum around. That's why we still need rockets to get to space. But back to your flight. The plane is now at a safe altitude and you don't need your oxygen mask anymore. But one interesting detail gets you thinking. Throughout the entire ordeal, you didn't hear the pilots mention the details of the emergency even once. Well, that's because pilots are always very careful with what and how they say. They'll never announce anything dramatic like fail or malfunction. They downplay any existing problem by replacing zero visibility with some fog. Something is broken with some technical problems, and so on. It's called positive scripting. Hey, looks like we've just jettisoned both our wings. Well, that should help us save on weight. Flight attendants are supposed to follow it as well, but passengers perceive pilots' announcements as more important and statistically listen to them attentively 100% of the time. At the same time, if there's a really serious problem you need to be prepared for, you'll definitely get informed. Now, picture this. You enter the passenger cabin of a spacious airplane, and as soon as you find your seat, you realize that for the next several hours, you're going to be crammed in the middle seat between two other human beings. But oh, look, there is a perfectly empty row of seats at the end of the plane. Time to switch places. But what you need to keep in mind is that by doing so, you might endanger the safety of the whole plane. Really? First of all, you aren't likely to be the only person willing to change your seat. But if a couple of passengers do it, they might upset the balance of the aircraft. And since most planes are extremely sensitive to any changes in their center of gravity, it can lead to very unpleasant consequences. Positive scripting again. Pilots must know the distribution of weight on the plane during the takeoff to make special calculations. If these calculations are wrong, there are chances that the aircraft will crash once it tries to leave the ground. Oops. But even if the worst doesn't happen, pilots can still have serious problems with controlling the plane. For example, one pilot almost didn't manage to turn the plane after just 4 passengers had left their assigned seats and moved to the front of the cabin. The situation was critical because the runway was unusually short, and if something had gone wrong, the plane wouldn't have been able to stop. It can also mess with the plane's balance if the airport staff load baggage incorrectly, for example, in the rear compartment instead of the front one. In this case, the machine can pitch up too fast, and the pilot will have a hard time trying not to lose speed. Now, that doesn't mean you can't change your seat on the plane at all, but before doing that, ask a cabin crew member if you're allowed to. Still shaky after the fright you've just had, you try to distract yourself. Luckily, you have a window seat and can watch the clouds and wait, you suddenly notice the way the airplane wings are flexing. They seem to flap so much that you get worried they're going to fall off. No worries. The wings are supposed to flex. They're designed this way. If they were stiff, they would snap off as soon as the lightest turbulence hit the plane. By the way, pilots recommend that nervous flyers who are afraid of turbulence should pick seats in the middle of the cabin. Turbulence affects the front and rear parts of the cabin the most. The middle, over the wing section, doesn't shake that much. Maybe you'll feel a bit calmer if you know that airplanes can safely operate with one engine, even during takeoff and landing. And both engines failing at the same time is almost unheard of. But even if something like this happens, a plane won't drop from the sky like a rock. If both engines stop working at a high altitude, pilots still have at least 20 minutes to find a place to land. A plane can land even if its wheels are broken. It does sound scary, but if the landing gear gets stuck, pilots just skid the plane's belly down on the runway. If everything's done correctly, such landings are more or less safe. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to land in our destination, more or less.
The plane rumbles into life and is soon roaring down the runway. You look out the window and your heart is racing. How exciting to be going on a holiday, finally. It's only once you're above the clouds at 35,000 feet that you get up for a stretch. You look down the aisle and notice that the cockpit door is open. To your growing horror, you notice that it's completely empty. The pilot's either napping somewhere, gone for a comfort break, or there's no one flying this thing. You ask the flight attendant, who tells you the truth. The plane is fully automatic, and there's nothing you can do. Self-flying planes are no longer the stuff of science fiction. They're already here. Many companies say pilotless passenger flights are simply a case of not if, but when. The issue is convincing the general public that they're safe. Some don't realize that once the seatbelt sign has been switched off, your typical passenger jet is likely flying by itself already. The autopilot can even climb, descend, and turn as instructed. We've already been flown about by an automated system. We just didn't realize to what extent. A commercial airliner can already land itself, though it's tricky to set up. Presently, 2 well-trained pilots are still required to be in the cockpit, for now. Many companies, such as Merlin Air, have been testing small 2-engine planes to autofly in the Mojave Desert. Airbus performed its first fully automated takeoff in December 2019, though there were 2 pilots in the cockpit, just in case. Some companies are developing hardware and software to retrofit older planes. The aim is to replicate everything a pilot can do via a set of computer systems. The barrier, they say, is human rather than technical. Old-fashioned lack of trust. The technical term for fear of flying is called aviophobia. It affects millions of people, up to 40% of all flyers. They're still flying, but they're just not particularly happy about it. Between 2.5% and 5% of the population are so anxious they won't fly at all. And yet, statistics continually reveal that flying is one of the safest means of travel, with nearly 95% of transportation fatalities in the US occurring on the roads. If you were to fly 500 miles every day for a year, the fatality risk is still only 1 in 85,000. Or, to put it in simpler terms, for the average American, the risk of a serious accident is just 1 in 11 million. There are much higher odds of being struck by lightning. Companies may be well served by offering breathing exercises and other strategies to make their customers feel more comfortable. It's surprising that airlines haven't already implemented a variety of programs to make travelers feel more relaxed. After all, many of these air accidents are caused by human error. Being automated may be a safer option. Then there's the other argument that it takes humans to create the automated systems. There's no doubt, though, that fully autonomous aircraft will soon be with us. As the population grows, our cities expand, and there will be more need for faster and more efficient travel. Many people will be reliant upon flying taxis to bypass hectic environments. They already exist. Not only can they cover short distances, but potentially thousands of miles. They can cover the same distance that a car can in a quarter of the time. They're much like helicopters in that they're capable of vertical takeoff and landing, known as VTOL, making them able to land and take off from almost anywhere. They will also be built of quieter mechanisms to keep noise pollution down, better than a train rattling past your bedroom window. They also use electric propulsion systems, which will keep emissions low. No endless traffic jams and mouthfuls of fumes. The difference with air taxis is that there's no pilot, with the destination locked in from the beginning. The challenge for designers is how to operate in environments with numerous structures, such as buildings and bridges, and how to navigate moving obstacles as well, such as other aircraft and even flocks of birds. Tackling a variety of weather conditions, too, can also make for complicated and even dangerous possibilities. Superstorms, dust storms, snow, wind gusts, and even tornadoes can pose real problems. It's not like you can instruct your cabbie to take a different route. Or will we be able to do just that? Perhaps we could verbally tell the system to divert from its projected pathway. This is the same situation for planes, particularly in terms of weather and air turbulence. There is still much more work to do. Air taxis can only accommodate a limited number of people, though it's projected that short-range flights could carry up to 14 people. There is so much confidence in these vehicles that a startup company, Skyports of Melbourne, Australia, want to start operating a large-scale, nationwide air taxi base by 2025. Other large corporations are also in the air taxi race, such as Boeing, Airbus, and Toyota. With larger planes already capable of pilotless flight, you may be wondering, why isn't this happening already? People will surely get used to it. Well, there are a few obstacles. There are regulations that are yet to be drawn up. Business people are already saying that regulators are falling behind, and that air taxis alone could be a multi-trillion-dollar industry within just 2 decades. Not all experts agree that the technology is reliable. Some pilots have also stated that automatics can malfunction and that someone must be there to take over. They also point to weather events that cannot be predicted and require the speed of human intervention. You could also argue that the pilots are going to say things like that because Well, they don't want to lose their jobs, and who can blame them? Yet they're not wrong. The Boeing 737 MAX, for example, was grounded in 2019 after two well-known crashes, one in Indonesia and the other in Ethiopia. The reason, in its simplest form, was due to flaws in the flight stabilization program. Incidents such as these only reinforce the fear. While pilots rightly say they've had to intervene when computer systems don't function correctly, in return, there's been documented crashes because pilots did not trust their systems and ignored warnings. There's also a very important factor to take into account. Research has suggested that without pilots, airlines could save $35 billion a year, and that's a lot of motivation. Regardless, the industry is changing, and there's increased development every year. Sophisticated sensors, improved cameras, self-assessing systems. Despite these advances, though, basic questions are yet to be fully answered. What would the automatic pilot do if there was an emergency? Could it automatically scope out a place to land safely? Could it put out a distress call? And how would it communicate with air traffic control? This uncertainty is what makes people fearful. We only have to look to drones to see what's already possible. Whether operated via smartphone or from onboard a ship, drones are unmistakably becoming more commonplace and performing an array of tasks. From filming whales to delivering parcels and long-range intelligence gathering, they map inaccessible terrain and use thermal sensors for search and rescue operations. They can even drop in supplies in disaster situations. They're literally saving lives. Their usage has tripled from 2019 to 2021 and is expected to do so again by the end of 2022. And yet, none of this is actually new. Over a century ago, the British developed unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs. They managed to fly a radio-controlled monoplane on March 21, 1917. More prototypes were developed over the decades, and in the 1940s, thousands of pilotless drones, or OQ-2 radio planes as they were known, were built. Many variations have been used ever since. Model enthusiasts have been using radio-controlled toy planes for decades. Drones continue to grow in popularity due to their high level of convenience and effectiveness. For these reasons and more, the technological advancements continue at breakneck speed. And yet, their full potential has not been reached, not by a long shot. If drones can be used for such extraordinary means, imagine what pilotless planes could do. The sky is literally the limit. While many are still fearful, people have already been flying for well over 100 years. The technology is there. It's whether the public is ready, in a manner of speaking, to take the leap that counts.
A plane with no identification marks is approaching the coast of Indonesia. It's not the most peaceful of times, and the flight operator is alarmed. Two fighter jets take to the sky, about to take down the unidentified plane. It's all about to end in a disaster, when the fighters notice one strange detail. December 1st, 1941. Captain of a Boeing 314, Robert Ford and his team are preparing for one of the longest flights on one of the biggest planes in the world. The Boeing 314 Clipper California is a high-capacity seaplane. It has no landing gear, so it can only land on water. Its length is 100 feet, and its wingspan is 150 feet. This is more than a 6-story building, and on board this plane, there is a restaurant, resting areas, and even a room with a bed. Despite its size, the Clipper California can stay in the air for more than 18 hours. Captain Ford doesn't suspect what is awaiting him ahead. He gets on the plane. Their flight is bound from San Francisco to Auckland, New Zealand. The first stop is Los Angeles. There's no problem with this. The next stop is Pearl Harbor. The flight is going fine. December 7th, 1941. It's been 3 days since the plane left Pearl Harbor. The last final step of the journey remains: flight to New Zealand. At this moment, Captain Ford receives an order to return the plane to the nearest Allied base. The way back is closed, so the plane continues to fly to Auckland. The Clipper lands safely at the Auckland airport and receives an order that seems impossible. Robert Ford and his team must paint over all the registration and identification marks on the plane and deliver it to LaGuardia, New York. Then, fly across the world. This is an uncharted route with a length of 23,000 miles. In the entire history of aviation at this time, no one has flown such a distance. The team doesn't have maps or modern navigation devices. They don't know the lands they will fly over. They don't know who they may meet on their way and at which airports they will land. They must maintain and repair the plane themselves, extract fuel, and plot the route. At the same time, they have almost no money. Immediately after receiving the order, the team goes to the Auckland Library. They study all the atlases and maps to create a detailed flight plan. First, they need to get to Australia, then fly to Africa along the coast of Asia, and then they should go to the US. The crew paint all over the signs on the plane and prepare for takeoff. Fortunately, before the start, one banker finds about their situation and gives them $500. The plane takes off. The team didn't notice they forgot to paint over the American flag. In a few days, it will save their lives. Before Australia, they fly to New Caledonia to evacuate a group of people from there and deliver them to Australia. The operation is successful. In Australia, the team needs to refuel the plane. They don't find special transport for Clipper services at that airport, so the crew themselves transport 800 cans of gasoline. And here's an important detail. The Boeing 314 doesn't use conventional fuel. It needs to be filled with special high-octane aviation gasoline. Early in the morning, the Clipper takes off and heads to Indonesia. The flight is going fine. They are approaching the airport. Meanwhile, the captain of the base where the Clipper is supposed to land notices an unidentified plane. He doesn't know who's flying it and from where. No one warned him about it. It may be an enemy plane. 2 fighter jets take to the sky. They are approaching the Clipper and don't see any identification marks on its body. The pilots are about to attack, but at that moment, they notice an American flag. If Robert Ford hadn't forgotten to paint it over, then everything would have ended badly for him and his crew. The fighters allow landing. The Clipper lands on the water. A boat floats towards it to meet the plane's crew, but stops. It turns out the plane landed on a place filled with sea mines, so the boat doesn't dare to sail there. The Clipper approaches the port and miraculously avoids contact with mines. Robert Ford and the crew of the plane are well met. They are going too quickly to rest and hit the road. But then, a big problem surfaces. The plane is running out of fuel, and at that naval base, there is only ordinary automobile gas. Nobody knows if the plane engine is going to go with it. It may burn out or stop working altogether, but there's no choice. They fill the tanks with ordinary fuel. Captain decides to take off using the remnants of aviation fuel, and during the flight, they switch to tanks with ordinary gasoline. When this happens, the plane's engine begins to clap and rattle, but after a while, it calms down. The flight continues. For 19 hours, they fly on dangerous fuel. Their next stop is Ceylon. The sky is covered with clouds. The pilot doesn't see the coast in the airport, so he decides to lower the plane below the clouds. They fly at an altitude of 300 feet above the surface of the sea and notice a huge whale ahead. The plane flies closer, and it turns out it's not a whale. It's an enemy ship. The Clipper begins to gain altitude to hide back into the clouds. Finally, they are again surrounded by a white veil. The booms and blasts are heard behind and below the plane. The Clipper's flying with zero visibility for 60 minutes. Finally, the clouds are clearing and they see the port of Ceylon. The team makes a short stopover and proceeds with its journey. As soon as the plane takes off, one of the engines explodes. Fortunately, they didn't have time to fly far from the port, so they successfully landed the plane on the water and repaired the engine. The Clipper continues its mission. Now, Robert Ford's team flies mainly over land. This is very risky, since the aircraft doesn't have landing gear and it can't safely land on solid ground. Finally, they get to the Congo. The team has a great time here, gains strength, rests, and most importantly, gets high-octane aviation gasoline. Things are going great, but there's another ordeal ahead. Now, the aviators will have to make the longest flight in their journey. Their next stop is a port town in Brazil, and the distance to it is 3,500 miles across the ocean. The maximum flight distance of the Boeing is 3,700 miles. Any deviation from the course or a strong headwind can easily prevent the aircraft from reaching the port. Worried, the crew refill the tank and load additional fuel onto the plane. They leave the Congo, taking off along the narrow river. At this moment, the pilot notices the river ends a few miles away with a waterfall. The plane must urgently gain altitude, but it can't. The large amount of additional fuel bears the Clipper down. The waterfall is getting closer. In the last seconds, the plane manages to rise to the desired height. But even after the waterfall, Boeing still doesn't get high enough. It hovers right above the rocky coastal cliffs. A slight inclination can lead to a crash. Fortunately, they manage to pass unharmed. The plane rises to the perfect height. During the flight from the Congo to Brazil, the crew broke a new record. It's 23 hours and 35 minutes in the air. The tired crew make a long-awaited landing in the city of Natal. However, the rest doesn't last long. 2 hours later, they take to the air and head to the next stop, an airbase in Panama. January 6, 1942, 5:54 a.m. The already legendary Boeing 314 is approaching LaGuardia, New York. The team can't wait to finish their journey. They contact the dispatch, and he tells them they can't land the plane only after 7 a.m., since the air terminal starts working at this time. For an hour, Robert Ford and his crew are circling in the air. It was probably the longest hour of their lives. Finally, the mission is complete. The Boeing 314 becomes the first passenger plane to make an almost around-the-world trip. This long flight lasted more than a month. This plane spent 209 hours or 8 days in the air. During this time, it covered more than 30,000 miles and made 18 landings.
Seat pockets on planes are mostly filled with in-flight magazines, a plane safety guide, and information about the airline. But they're also home to all sorts of trash, grime, and bacteria that just don't belong there. A passenger coughs into a tissue or wipes their runny nose with a handful of them. But instead of immediately getting rid of them, it gets placed into the seat back pocket. Now another passenger comes along on the very next flight, sitting in that same exact seat. With limited space around them, putting some of their belongings into the pockets leads to potentially millions of germs spreading significantly to them. It's no wonder that these seats' back pockets can get so nasty. Everybody puts their trash inside of them. Passengers often leave uneaten candy bars, diapers, apple cores, and nuts. This leaves crumbs and other matters everywhere. All of this trash is taken out before the next flight, but they're rarely ever deeply cleaned. It's all dependent on the airline itself as to how often they'll really clean the plane and wipe everything down properly. The plastic tray tables where we eat and place our things are one of, if not, the dirtiest parts of any airplane. These seatback tray tables that we use can have over 2,000 CFUs, colony-forming units of bacteria, per square inch living on their surface. The ridged texture keeps cups of soda from sliding off the table, also creating tiny mountain ranges where the microbes attach themselves. Sugary sodas and juices that spill onto tray tables throughout flights give bacteria the perfect environment to stay and feed. Bacteria love living on this plastic almost as much as human skin. And there are lots of microbes that your tray catches and holds onto, especially when they're not thoroughly cleaned. Much like air vents that are always fiddled with, seatbelt buckles are probably the most touched thing on any aircraft. The average buckle can contain nearly 1,000 colony-forming units of bacteria per square inch on it at all times. Passengers touch seatbelt buckles to go to the bathroom. Even after washing their hands, people will walk down the aisle touching all the headrests for balance to get to their seat. After settling in and buckling up, most will then touch their face, eyes, phone, and even food for the rest of the trip. Airports can be big virus spreaders, but they're cleaned constantly. The same cannot be said for the subway, buses, or even taxis. Subway door handles, luggage carts, chairs, seats, and poles are very rarely cleaned and are a breeding ground for all sorts of nasties. New York City's subway system is one of the dirtiest in the world, with a mind-boggling 2 million bacteria colonies per square inch on nearly every surface. Many of these have still yet to be identified. They're that rare. It goes with you everywhere, sometimes even into the bathroom. As a result, cell phones could be up to 10 times dirtier than any toilet seat. E. coli, the bacteria that can give stomach cramps and fevers, can live for hours on warm surfaces like phones. The best solution? Wash your hands thoroughly before touching phones, and make sure that phone gets a good wipe down with a disinfectant. Most people have a smartphone by them day and night, meaning that all the bacteria picked up during the day is transferred to them. Everyone touches the remote control at some point, but it isn't even thought of when cleaning the house. It falls to the floor or gets into the side of the sofa, a warm, dark home for mold and bacteria, where there are lots of crumbs and grime. A good clean with an antibacterial wipe every so often will help keep it shiny and germ-free. Blowing out candles on a birthday cake can expel a mist of saliva that always lands on the birthday cake frosting. This can lead to some very unhappy birthday parties if someone is sick. Sometimes it's better to skip the candles altogether, or accept the risk that every day is someone's birthday celebration, and a little bit of spit won't always hurt you. A single ATM gets touched by hundreds of people in a day. The chances that at least one of those people touching the buttons is sick and freely spreading the flu or cold is naturally quite high then. The flu, for example, can live up to 2 days on objects. It can even be days after someone has recovered from that virus that it'd still be active and spreadable. ATMs are cleaned, but not all the time. It would be impossible to service every single one in a major city daily. A single dollar bill can be home to thousands of different kinds of bacteria, including the usual suspects like E. coli, staph, and a bacterium that causes acne breakouts. Paper money can reportedly carry more germs than a household toilet, and bills are a hospitable environment for gross microbes. The smaller in value of the bill, the dirtier it will be because it's in circulation more. Money can't be cleaned like a lot of things, but taking it to a bank for new, hopefully cleaner bills is possible. Use hand sanitizer and wash your hands after handling money too, just in case. Grocery store shopping carts can have more bacteria on them than what's ever been found in public restrooms. That includes toilet seats and the flushing handles. Cleansing wipe dispensers have been appearing at many major grocery chains, and some stores even go the extra mile to clean them after the day's through. But these simply aren't enough to keep up with the petri dish that the handles are. With over 100,000 bacteria per square inch, it's nearly impossible to keep them clean. Toothbrush holders hold onto moisture and are rarely cleaned, making them one of the dirtiest things in our homes. It can be filled with salmonella, E. coli, and lots of mold over time when it's not getting cleaned regularly. Wash your toothbrush holder in hot, soapy water every week to minimize the chances of getting sick. Toothbrushes should be changed every 3 to 4 months for a very good reason. It takes a while for the toothbrush to dry. This creates the perfect home for mold and fungus to spread and grow. There can be more than 600 different kinds of bacteria living inside of your mouth. A kiss alone can transfer about 80 million bacteria from one mouth to another. A good brushing routine will have around 1,000 to 100,000 bacteria living on each tooth's surface. But for those that don't brush, bacteria can be up to 100 million or 1 billion bacteria on each tooth. The dirtiest thing in our home can only be one thing: the kitchen sponge. It's wet, absorbent, and food and dirt are rubbed into it all the time. Then we wipe down our kitchen tops just to spread all that grubbiness around some more. Sponges are very hard to keep clean. The best way to keep things sanitary is to replace it when it starts to smell bad. It's no surprise that if the sponges are filthy, then sinks are too. Rinsed fruit, vegetables, prepared raw meat, and dishes needing cleaning all make their way to the kitchen sink. This creates an extremely high breeding ground for E. coli, salmonella, and many other gross things. They'll stick to the sides and drain holes and grow like crazy. Clean sinks before and after each use, and make sure to keep them as dry as possible to prevent any mold growth as well. Restaurant menus and condiment dispensers aren't cleaned nearly as often as they should be. If someone with a cold was using the condiments right before you, this greatly increases the chance of the cold-causing bacteria being on your hands and then your fries. Menus are rarely washed with disinfectants after each use. Customers have been touching quite a few things like chairs, tables, their faces, or hair before they give the menus back. Dog toys need to be cleaned regularly to prevent any bacteria or mold growth from spreading too much. Each time a dog slobbers on a toy, they don't just transfer their mouth bacteria. They've created a sticky, wet place for other germs to live on. There's no way of telling just what their favorite plaything has picked up around the house or yard. Purses and bags could have more bacteria than we really considered. They're regularly placed on dirty floors, bathroom floors, countertops, and out on the street. This exposes them to all sorts of germs, like salmonella, E. coli, mold, and fungus, all the time. Alcohol wipes are very good to carry around in your purse or bag to give them a good wipe down when needed. Drinking fountains are a cesspool of bacteria and germs. Over 2 million bacteria per square inch can be found on the fountain's faucets alone. As they get wet and touched by hundreds of hands, the bacteria and mold begin to grow. If someone has coughed or sneezed near it recently, those particles will cling onto the water. This creates a higher chance of the next person drinking from it catching something. They make plane wings smooth to let air flow easily around their surface and reduce resistance during the flight. So why did they add these convex yellow hooks? They obviously worsen the aerodynamics. Yeah, they do, but they're also necessary for your safety. Imagine a plane making an emergency landing in the open sea. Everything's going well. The aircraft is sliding on the water. Then rescue boats sail to this place to evacuate the passengers. They leave the plane through emergency exits located above the wings. Before the door opens, the escape slide inflates. Passengers need to walk on the wing and go down the slide, but the wing surface is slippery because of water. They might fall and get hurt. To prevent this, the stewards install a rescue rope. They attach one end to the door and the other to the edge of the wing, passing it through these hooks. During the evacuation, people hold on to this cable like a railing and don't fall. They can also attach rescue boats to the wing with a rope and these hooks, so the sea won't take people far away from the plane. By the way, the plane can stay on the water for 10 minutes to 60 hours, depending on the model, weather conditions, and the pilot's skills. Both the main and emergency exits have extra handles for crew members. During an evacuation, people may panic and accidentally push the flight attendants off their feet. To avoid a fall, they hold onto these handles. A seat belt on an airplane has a slightly different purpose from that in your car. The one in the vehicle protects you from a horizontal hit. When a plane is going through turbulence, it's shaking up and down. Your waist belt keeps you from hitting the ceiling. Crew members have handcuffs for problem passengers. If someone behaves badly and interferes with the flight attendants have the right to chain them to their seats. To do this, they use police handcuffs or plastic ties. This is the maximum that can be done during the flight. Then they report a rowdy person to the airport and hand them over to the police after landing. During an emergency, oxygen masks drop automatically. They have an extra purpose you might not know about: to equalize the pressure and prevent panic. Air pressure can change because of turbulence. So, among other things, the masks help passengers stay calm. Your seat is your safe haven. That life jacket under it won't let you drown. Also, the seat's surface is made of waterproof material. If water gets into the cabin, the seat will save you from freezing, since it won't get wet. It's also fireproof. The cover can prevent the fire from spreading through the cabin. But more importantly, it can save you from the flames. Of course, you'll most likely never have to use this feature, but it's nice to feel safe, isn't it? You can use the tray table in the seat in front of you like a hammock. Just tie a belt, a blanket, or a towel around the table and stretch your feet out. You might have noticed black triangles on the wall above the seats. For you, as a passenger, they may indicate the seats that have the best view of the wings, where you can take the most beautiful flight photos. But the triangles weren't created for your camera. The crew members monitor the condition of the aircraft through windows under these signs. Suppose the wings freeze, the engine catches fire, or the pilot receives a signal about some problem. In that case, the crew will quickly move to the triangles and assess the situation. And there you are, sitting under the triangle, looking at the wing and thinking, why are the wings located in the lower part of the plane? They could install them above the windows or right in the center. Actually, some planes have them in the middle and higher up, and each location makes sense. The engine and turbines are under the wings. It's much easier to repair them since they're close to the ground. And in case of an emergency landing in the sea, the wings act as a rescue cushion. They help to keep the plane on the water. Empty fuel tanks under the wing can also help the plane stay on the surface. But this position has certain risks. Debris can get into the turbines on the runway. Fortunately, this is unlikely to happen since they carefully clean it. Planes with wings in the middle get the least air resistance. That's why they build fighter jets and supersonic aircraft this way. Big cargo planes have wings in the upper part of the hull. Thanks to it, the aircraft stays close to the ground. It makes it easier to load cargo. Also, it's safer to land on unprepared runways with high wings, since debris won't get into the turbines. The aerodynamics of these planes works better thanks to such wings. They get less air resistance and deliver cargo faster. Oxygen inside the masks is a combination of chemicals. The transportation of oxygen tanks is too expensive for the airline. They take up a lot of space and increase weight, which leads to extra fuel consumption. Therefore, they use a chemical oxygen generator. It's located in the panel above your head. There's a small tank with barium, sodium, and potassium compounds. They mix and create a hot chemical reaction that releases oxygen and passes it into the mask. Small holes in windows save the glass from breaking. The air pressure inside the aircraft is much stronger than that outside. The difference is so big that the air can just break the glass from the other side. To prevent this, they drill small holes. The air penetrates there and reduces the load on the window. By the way, they have a round shape for the same reason. It's ideal for an equal distribution of air. If they were square or triangular, air streams with moisture would accumulate in the corners. It would lead to destruction. Plus, all water gets dried out thanks to the hole. Windows are made of triple glass. The outer glass takes the pressure. The middle one works like a fuse. The third layer protects the second one from passengers who like to touch it. Technically, the plane could fly with one layer, but it would be dangerous. They also installed extra protection for the wheels. They experience huge loads during landing, but don't worry, they won't burst. The tires can withstand pressure 5 to 7 times bigger than they actually get. See the toilet sign on the door? There's a secret latch under it. Crew members can unlock the door from the outside, so don't expect complete privacy. Of course, it's prohibited for other passengers to do that. The cabin crew can open it in case of emergencies. When flight attendants pass through the cabin during the flight, they always touch the upper shelves above the seats. They don't check if the luggage compartments are closed. Along the bottom of these compartments, there are handles in the form of jagged edges. Flight attendants hold on to them not to fall. It's a pretty convenient thing, especially for those who don't like touching the seats with sitting passengers on the way to the toilet. There's an important reason why they install turbines under the wings. Previously, they put them in the plane's tail to improve the aerodynamics of the flight. If one of the engines stopped working, the cabin wouldn't shake so much. Yes, planes can fly with one turbine running. Also, the wings were thinner and streamlined thanks to turbines in the tail, which was also good for aerodynamics. But it turned out that such a location meant additional costs. The engine in the tail was inconvenient to maintain. They used to place it high, so people needed special equipment and extra time to service it. And of course, it affected the ticket price. They started to install turbines under the wings to save money and time. Have you ever noticed the flashing light in the cabin before takeoff? This happens when the pilot disconnects a plane from the airport power supply and switches to the onboard one. This rapid transition may cause flashing.
Have you ever watched an action-packed Hollywood film where an airplane gets a hole in its side and everyone starts freaking out? Stuff starts flying all over the place and people are barely staying in their seats. Well, in real life, a small hole in the plane's body isn't going to cause that much drama. However, I have an incredible story to tell you about a pilot who actually managed to land a plane with half of its roof missing. Can you believe it? Make sure your seatbelt is fastened because this one is going to be a wild ride. On April 28, 1988, a Boeing 737 owned by Aloha Airlines took off from Hilo International Airport en route to Honolulu. Before this flight, the plane had already flown 3 short trips from Honolulu to Hilo, Maui, and Kauai. Everything was chill that day, and the weather was nice and calm. It looked like smooth sailing all the way. The captain of the flight was Robert Schornsteimer, and the co-pilot was Madeline Tompkins, both experienced pilots with thousands of flight hours in the Boeing 737. Bright and early that morning, before taking off from Honolulu, Madeline did the regular pre-flight inspection and said that everything was good to go. At 11 a.m., they took off from Honolulu and went to Maui, then Hilo. When they got to Hilo, they didn't leave the cockpit or check the plane from the outside. It wasn't a requirement, so why bother? At 1:25 p.m., the plane took off for the final leg of the round trip, with 95 people on board. 89 passengers, 2 pilots, 3 flight attendants, and an FAA traffic controller who sat in the observer seat in the cockpit. The plane had taken off like normal and reached its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet without any hiccups. But then, 26 miles from Kahului, things went totally haywire. The pilots heard a loud whooshing sound, followed by a crack, and then a rush of wind that was so loud it was deafening. Turns out, a small section of the roof on the left side had come loose, causing the plane to decompress explosively. And to make matters even worse, the decompression caused a chain reaction that led to a huge chunk of the plane's roof ripping off completely. That missing part was a massive 18.5 feet long and was part of the skin that covered the plane from the cockpit all the way back to the forewing area. The pilots didn't have a clue what was going on when the disaster struck. The first officer, who was the one in charge of the plane at that time, suddenly felt her head snap back, and then she saw a bunch of gray insulation and debris flying around the cockpit like it was a tornado. Meanwhile, the captain took a look around and was shocked to see that the cockpit door was nowhere to be seen, and instead of the first-class ceiling, he was staring straight up at the sky. The plane started to tilt from side to side, making it challenging to keep it under control. The crew in the cockpit quickly put on their oxygen masks, and the captain took over control of the plane. He then initiated an emergency descent towards the nearest airport on Maui Island. Luckily, all the passengers were seated, and most of them had their seatbelts fastened since the seatbelt sign was still on. Unfortunately, the 3 flight attendants were caught off guard. One of them was near the hole and was pulled out of the plane. The other 2 were thrown to the floor, with one of them hitting her head hard and losing consciousness. The third attendant tried to help the passengers and keep them calm. At the same time, the pilots were desperately trying to let air traffic control know that they were in trouble. But there were communication problems even between themselves due to the loud noise and the fact that they were wearing oxygen masks. They had to resort to hand signals to understand each other. Moreover, they were unsure whether their messages were being heard by ATC. The plane's controls were not responding properly, which made the captain's job of flying the plane even harder. The first officer was doing her best to assist the captain and communicate with the tower. It was only after the plane descended to an altitude of 14,000 feet that the controller finally received their distress call and immediately started making arrangements for an emergency landing. The control tower wasn't prepared for a situation like this, though. In fact, the tower had to call 911, just like any other regular person would do in case of an emergency. The problem was that the controller didn't understand the severity of the situation, and they didn't realize that the passengers and crew members would need medical help. This was because the crew had only reported a rapid decompression and hadn't explained the entire situation in detail. The plane was in a very bad mess, but the captain was doing everything he could to safely land the plane. As they descended towards the airport, the captain commanded the first officer to lower the landing gear, but the indicator light didn't turn on. The plane also had an issue with the left engine, which failed as they approached the runway. Despite these problems, the captain used the reverse thrust of the working engine to try and land the plane. It was a difficult and dangerous task, but they managed to land the plane safely on the runway. The passengers and crew members were then evacuated from the plane. It was a miracle that everyone survived. However, 65 people were injured. They had been hit by debris and pieces of the plane's body that were flying around. Unfortunately, the ground staff wasn't aware of the severity of the situation and didn't have enough resources to provide immediate medical assistance to the injured passengers. The first ambulance arrived 7 minutes after the plane landed, which wasn't an ideal scenario. Furthermore, there were only 2 ambulances on the entire island, which couldn't accommodate all the injured people. As a result, tour vans were used to transport the passengers to the hospital. Fortunately, 2 drivers who were former paramedics provided immediate first aid to the injured right on the runway. Meanwhile, the airport mechanics and office staff took the vans to the hospital, which was located 3 miles away. Despite the chaotic and stressful circumstances, only 8 people suffered severe injuries, but they all later made a full recovery. The plane was in really bad shape though, and it was no wonder it couldn't handle the stress of the decompression incident. Despite its age not being a problem, it had experienced a whole lot of takeoffs and landings, which took a toll on its integrity. The salty and humid environment it operated in only added to the damage. You see, planes are designed to withstand a certain number of flight cycles, and this plane had exceeded that number by a long shot. The majority of its flights were short domestic ones, which meant it had to take off and land way more times than it was designed for. This is what ultimately led to the roof coming off during the flight. The poor condition of the plane meant that it was beyond repair and had to be dismantled right there at the airport. What's interesting is that in an interview after the accident, one passenger recalled that she had noticed a crack in the plane's fuselage while she was boarding. She didn't tell the flight crew about it because she didn't think it was worth it, so they didn't know to check it. It's important to remember that these types of accidents are very rare nowadays. Major airlines and airports take numerous steps to ensure safety. And according to Harvard University, the chances of being in an airplane accident are about 1 in 1.2 million. That's a tiny percentage, and I don't know about you, but I find that very comforting. And even if something did happen, such as the roof of the plane coming off, it's reassuring to know that the pilots are trained to handle emergencies and can still land the plane safely.
A mechanic from Illinois was called out to tow a crashed vehicle. As he approached the upside-down Ford Ranger, suddenly he was struck with inspiration. Now, most people would only see a wrecked car, but this guy saw a whole new type of vehicle. He then took 2 pickups, a Ford Ranger and a Ford F-150. Then, he spent 6 months working on a strange new vehicle. With the 2 cars combined, he created the illusion that there was only one. With enough room for passengers, it's even legally approved to drive along the road. With the 4 wheels on top all spinning autonomously in line with the ones on the road, he creates confusion wherever he drives. Yeah, it looks quite weird even when perfectly parked. The importance of eating your greens is something many wholesale companies try to convey to their potential buyers. One company in England called Birdseye went to the next level. And they built a car in the shape of a pea to promote their products. It's built on the chassis of an off-road go-kart, and it has many parts from a Volkswagen Beetle. It may look like a toy, but it's not. Equipped with a small Honda engine, this little zooming green pea can even reach 60 miles per hour. Unfortunately, you won't see it anywhere on the road, as its only purpose was for a commercial. But it did gain a lot of fame from ads. Rumor has it, many people even inquired about how they could purchase this weird vehicle. In 1964, a small, lightweight Jeep called the Mini Moke was designed in the US. They offered it to Great Britain with the belief that it would suit their terrain. Still, the car was rejected for its low ground clearance, and the open side doors weren't quite adapted for the English weather. It was further offered to warmer climates in Portugal and Australia. The idea was that it could be used for tourism, and it could be an easy way to travel around. But without any other use for fun activities like 4-wheel driving, it lost popularity. Still, with the introduction of electric engines, it's making a comeback. Well, it's no surprise. The clearance now is higher, the seats are more comfortable, and the price is quite affordable too. The car costs about $21,000. In the early 20th century, cars began to rule the streets. Some of them were steam-powered, but that was far too noisy. There were even electric vehicles, but as they couldn't be powered outside of cities, they also failed to catch on. But there was another, stranger design. In the early 1920s, the Liable Helica was invented. It was also called the plane with no wings. In this car, the driver sits in the front with one passenger seated behind. The aerodynamic body of Liable Helica is structured similarly to a plane. It's mostly made from plywood, with a large propeller on the front to push the car forwards. The designer believed that all the added weight from normal car parts added unnecessary weight. At the time, steel was incredibly important for other uses, and the lightweight frame was his solution. Weighing about 550 pounds, This vehicle could reach speeds up to 106 miles per hour. That all sounds fantastic, but there was a serious downside. The car was incredibly noisy, and to protect their ears, people had to wear similar headwear as though they were in an actual plane. Not the best choice for a road trip, but surprisingly, 30 of these were sold. With a shortage of fuel in the 1940s, inventors were trying to find alternate forms of transport. The electric vehicles were looked at again after being left on the drawing board for the past 30 years. So, a brand new electric car, L'Off Electric, was designed in 1938 and then built in 1942. It's a three-wheeled egg-shaped vehicle with room for only one passenger. This egg on wheels was powered by a battery pack. One full charge was enough for this little egg to travel up to 63 miles. It could ride along the roads at its top speed of 44 miles per hour. This tiny car was also quite lightweight, only about 770 pounds. I wish I had such a car today. It would squeeze into any parking spot.
Yeah!
Bonus, there were no blind spots in this car, with a 270-degree view around it. But unfortunately, it didn't catch on, and only one was ever made. German engineering has always been at a high standard with automobiles, and one model, the Amphicar, took them to another level. A car that could also be driven into the water and could function as a boat. While driving at modest speeds on the road, the wheels are slightly lower than normal, but once in the water, the front wheels work as rudders. It could sail at a speed of up to 7 knots. The designers were aware that it wasn't the best boat or car, so they advertised it as the best boat driven on the road and the best car to sail on water. It was actually pretty decent as a seaworthy vessel. Many people were surprised that there were no leaks, even if left docked for several hours. It grew in popularity, and almost 4,000 vehicles were sold in the 1960s. It even inspired several more models of boat cars in the automobile industry. Have you ever wanted to hire a limousine? What if the limo is crossed with a plane? One guy decided he wanted to combine his love for a 727 plane with the ability to drive it on the road. First, he found a plane. Then he removed the wings and the tail from the body and attached the plane's body to a Mercedes-Benz bus. So, it's kinda a regular bus in a plane's disguise. Stretched at 52 feet, it became the biggest limousine in the world. There's enough room for 40 people, but it can still drive at up to 124 miles per hour. The cockpit is mostly preserved. However, a steering wheel was replaced to drive the limo, for obvious reasons. The original folding staircase still works, making it a nice welcome to passengers while boarding the Boeing limo. Surprisingly, it's registered to be driven on the road, and you can even rent this 24,000-pound limousine. At the beginning of the 20th century, car engines became a lot more efficient, and the availability of affordable gas helped automobiles really kick off. Back in 1927, car designers invented something really posh. Meet Bugatti Royale. It was the most luxurious car ever made. At 21 feet long and weighing 7,000 pounds, almost twice the average weight of a sedan built today. However, at the time of its creation, there was a great decline in the economies around the world. Unfortunately, this lavish car wasn't a success. Even the royalty of Europe had no interest in such an extravagant purchase. 25 had been planned to be made, but as interest faded, only 3 were sold. The production line ceased with only 7 built in the end. The engine design was based on a French aircraft engine and is the largest ever built. But following the failure of the Bugatti Royale, the remaining engines were reused for newly built high-speed rail cars for the French railway system. In 1930, an inventor, John Archibald Purves, created something he believed will be the high-speed vehicle of the future. He got his inspiration from designs made by Leonardo da Vinci. John felt that the brilliant man was onto something. He then created the Dynasphere, a mono-wheeled vehicle that ran on electricity. This 10 feet high singular wheel, made from lattice iron and covered in leather, weighed around 1,000 pounds. The driver's seat and the motor are connected and mounted on wheels. At first, steering was only possible when the driver leaned to either side, but later, a steering wheel was implemented to make it easier. It could reach up to 30 miles per hour. There was some interest in it as a fun activity for the beach. And a modified version with 8 seats was also made. But unfortunately, the designer's vision of giant wheels covering the highways instead of cars didn't come true. Probably because he has yet to find a way to stop it from moving, other than running into something. How can spiders survive when they lose a leg? When they're in a dangerous situation and try to run away, they can lose legs and regrow them only a couple months later. They'll survive without any problem because most of the time, their legs come off at break points. Those are joints that contain muscles and constrict, which helps spiders minimize blood loss. If they lose a leg at the part that comes before the break point, the spider still sheds it, but it will lose more blood. It will be harder for the animal to recover in this case. Speaking of spiders, have you noticed how they sometimes stay extremely still for a long time? They're motionless while waiting for potential prey to land in their web. When moving around, they waste energy and drive unnecessary attention to themselves. Either a hungry bird praying for a quick snack will see it, or a spider will remain hungry because flies will be less likely to come near their web. When spinning a web, they waste a lot of energy. Even after the web is finished, a spider may have to wait for days or weeks to catch something. So, it's important to save as much energy as possible. Hunting spiders are way more active, but the majority of them are nocturnal predators. They spend their days relaxing, tucked away under a rock or in a nest. Roast potatoes can stay hot for a really long time, and this mostly has to do with the fatty, starchy crust that's like some sort of an insulating layer. When you pre-boil a potato, this causes its starch granules to absorb water and swell until carb molecules seep out to produce this type of thick gel. Since potatoes are in the oven, high temperatures drive off moisture. This makes the gelatinized starch on the outside of the potato chunk and creates a crispy crust. This crust traps the heat inside. The fat from the baking tray collects in cracks too, and the heat-keeping structure stays strong. Birds don't get electrocuted while perching on power lines because it's not voltages that will harm them, but voltage differences, and electricity wouldn't flow without them. So, if you see a bird standing on a single power line at, for example, 35,000 volts, the lack of a voltage difference is something that keeps the animal safe. But if it accidentally extends its wings and touches another power line that's at a different voltage, it won't end well. That's the reason why electricity companies make sure there's plenty of space between the cables. Have you ever wondered why airplane pilots won't try to land on grass when the landing gear doesn't deploy? The grass may seem like a good solution at first because it's soft, true. But the surface will neither be smooth nor even. When pressure is high, landing on grass can lead to unpredictable movements and cause issues such as structure formation. That happens because of bouncing and unequal pressure. This can even result in fuel leakage and prevent the doors from opening. Bald heads tend to be shiny, even though the skin elsewhere on the human body isn't. Most of our skin is covered with tiny hairs that give it some sort of velvety peach fuzz look. With male pattern baldness, the hair follicles tend to shrink and turn into skin cells, which means there's no hair there at all. And the scalp is especially shiny due to the sebaceous glands. They produce and secrete some kind of oily matter that protects our skin. Sebaceous glands are located all across our skin, but the scalp has way more of them. So, this oil coats the skin, which is why it turns into a more reflective surface. House cats will rarely meow at one another, but they become chatty with humans, and this could be related to domestication. The process of taming cats and keeping them as pets started nearly 10,000 years ago. Before that, cats were pretty much loners. They rarely encountered other cats, so they didn't even have to use their voices to communicate with each other. Instead, they communicated through their sense of smell, which included things like rubbing against a certain object, for example, a tree. So they didn't even have to come face to face with other members of their species to send a message. And that's how they mostly communicate today as well. But humans don't have such a good sense of smell as cats, so these foxy creatures had to think of a way to send us a message and still get what they wanted from us, which turned out to be meowing. If you're planning a day trip to a desert, for example, the Sahara in North Africa, you're going to want to bring good sunscreen, and a lot of water, of course, but also a snug sleeping bag if you're planning to spend the night there too. Deserts really become cold during the night. In the Sahara, temperatures go from an average high of 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day to 25 degrees during the night. Such dramatic change happens because of two main factors: humidity and sand. Sand doesn't retain heat that well. When light and heat from the sun reach a desert, sand grains from the top layer absorb heat. But they release it back into the air relatively quickly. So during the day, the sand radiates the energy coming from the sun, which eventually heats the air and leads to extremely high temperatures. And during the night, the sand is quickly losing heat once again. But this time, there's no sunlight that would reheat the desert. That leaves the sand colder than before and leads to such low temperatures. In arid deserts such as the Atacama Desert in Chile and the Sahara, the humidity is extremely low. That means the amount of water vapor in the air is almost zero. Unlike sand, water does well to store heat. Water vapor in the air traps heat close to the ground. It's like you cover the ground with a huge blanket. That way, you stop it from dissipating into the atmosphere. Also, when the air has a high level of humidity, it requires more energy to heat up. That means it takes more time for that same energy to disappear and for the surroundings to get colder. Since there's almost no humidity in deserts, such areas can both quickly heat up and cool down. If you microwave water for tea, it will taste worse than when it's made with a kettle. That's because the temperature of the liquid is the main factor for a good tea. Water should reach a rolling boil before you pour it over tea leaves, whether they're loose or bagged. It's an easy thing to do with tea kettles, both the electric and stovetop varieties. When the burner or the electric heating element is on, the water at the bottom of the vessel warms up. As it's getting hotter, water through the rest of the kettle comes to the boiling point. A microwave doesn't heat from the bottom up. It creates electromagnetic waves that randomly jump around the box. You probably notice when you try to reheat leftovers, they end up partially frozen in some spots and extremely hot in others. The same will happen with water because it's hard to control microwave energy. Overheated liquid won't be good for tea either. When water goes above 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the boiling point for water, it can destroy the compounds that give a tea its specific flavor. Have you ever wondered why those electrical plugs most Americans use have holes in the prongs? The story dates back to the early 20th century when Harvey Hubble Jr. invented different types of electrical plugs. He started with the detachable electric plug, which was the first ever of that type. Some of his designs had prongs with indents, those aligned with tiny bumps inside the electrical sockets. Such an indent and bump system secured the prongs in place after people would insert a plug into a socket. At some point, these indents gave way to holes, which worked in the same way. But that's just part of the story. Most of the modern outlets don't even have bumps anymore. They keep plugs from falling out of the wall by using friction and pressure. Today, some manufacturers insert a rod through all the holes in a line of prongs. That's how they lock them in place while encasing them in plastic. Some also say the holes save metal, which cuts costs of manufacturing in the long term.
You get on any airliner and notice the captain always sits in the left seat and the co-pilot on the right. And that's not by accident. The reasons could be historical. One theory goes that the first air forces were recruited from cavalry officers. They used to wear swords on their left side, so it was more comfortable for them to mount horses from the animal's left. When we eventually went from horses to metal birds, the tradition stuck. Another theory involves trains. The first international air route connected London and Paris. During this flight, pilots navigated by following the railroad. History has it that once, when the weather was especially bad, two planes collided because both were flying over the tracks. After that, it was agreed that the aircraft would fly on the right side of the track. Pilots had to sit on the left side of the plane to see how much clearance they had with oncoming aircraft on their left. As for helicopter pilots in command, they usually, but not always, sit on the right. Copters are more unstable than airplanes. That's why pilots prefer not to let go of the cyclic stick. This stick controls the helicopter's direction and altitude. The cyclic stick sits between the pilot's knees, and they use their right hand to hold onto it. The pilot's left hand moves the lever that changes the blade's pitch and presses other buttons on the central console. By the way, both seats have full control of an airplane. There are no regulations specifying which seat the captain and co-pilot should occupy. The co-pilot is just as experienced and capable of flying a plane as the captain. The captain often flies the plane to its destination, and the co-pilot operates it on the way back. Pilots are tested every 6 to 8 months. They use flight simulators and practice all kinds of emergencies. After that, examiners assess them. Safety and technical tests and medical examination also take place regularly. An extra seat in the cockpit behind the pilots is for inspectors who monitor the flight. This seat is also called a jump seat because when you get up from it, it folds up right away. Yep, a lot like movie theater seats. If you're a nervous flyer, pick a seat in the middle of the cabin if possible. Turbulence mostly affects the front and rear parts of the cabin. The middle section, which is over the wings, doesn't get shaken that much. Imagine the plane like a big teeter-totter. Similar principle when it comes to turbulence. Choosing a window seat, you get an opportunity to see how the airplane wings flex and flap. They're designed to move this way. If the wings were stiff, they would snap off once turbulence hit the plane. Well, that's comforting. In most cases, turbulence only drops you a couple of feet down, even though it might feel as if you're falling from the top of the Empire State Building. Woohoo! If the turbulence is strong enough for pilots to ask flight attendants to sit down, the plane can go 10 to 20 feet down. The most extreme white-knuckled turbulence is super rare, but it can make the plane drop 100 feet. That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay